Well, on behalf of the organization, look at our government policies. These government policies aspire for economic transformation. And the 13th plan document is targeted to graduate Nepal from least developed country status, LDC status, by 2022. And in addition to that, the 14th plan targets achieving sustainable development goals, SDG, and becoming middle income countries by 2030. I mean, from these aspirational goals, here the challenge is how to translate this development aspiration into good jobs and achieve structural transformation in the economy. What could be the desired pathways for structural transformation and job creation? In this workshop, we will be discussing a range of policy sectors which can create quality jobs with greatest payoff. And we'll be also discussing an action to alleviate whatever constraint exists in creation of these jobs. And to highlight on the program, and also I will make presentations on growth and transformation pathways, I invite Dr. William, my very old friend, Dr. William, is Chief of International Development Cooperation in ODI. Dirk, you have the floor.
But also a long-standing partner of the Overseas Development Institute. So my name is Dirk de Velde. I'm the head of the International Economic Transformation Program at ODI, and we're working in a range of countries with partners, so country government. What I'll be doing is just discussing a bit of the main findings of the project now, and we can then discuss details later. So first of all, I think Dr. Posch has already highlighted some of the challenges. I mean, I think there's some good news and there are some challenges, right? There is some news in terms of there has been growth over the last 15 to 20 years, 4% per year on average, and at the same time there's also been significant poverty reduction. I mean, there have been a range of factors behind this. The agriculture sector has grown, but also the remittances, which now stand at about 30% of GDP, have contributed to poverty reduction. But at the same time, if you look at the economy, there's a lack of economic transformation. Think about productivity change, think about moving from low productivity activities to high productivity activities, think about moving from low productivity agriculture to high productivity agriculture to high productivity other sectors, manufacturing and the like. And that is a significant challenge because that will make it more difficult to sustain jobs in the future and to reach graduation targets in the future. So that's a challenge, the challenge of transformation and job creation. We'll be having we've done a range of studies, we've got briefing papers, they're around, and they're also on our website. There are really two parts to this. So the first part is more at a general level, a vision level, which I think is very important. And the second part is thinking much more in detail and what are the binding constraints to growth, transformation, particularly looking at what's happening at a firm level. So what we're thinking in terms of dealing with a challenge in Nepal, there are two types of solutions that I think are really important. First of all, it is important to design and implement a vision of economic transformation, job creation. And one way to do that is by putting in place a unifying and practical vision of how Nepal can prosper and create jobs and inclusive growth at the same time. And that's just to reinforce the agenda behind the Planning Commission and a range of other institutions, and really to embed this across government, across partners, and across sort of different unions, political parties, businesses, and a range of other actors. Because if you do that, it makes implementation of a particular policy so much more easy. And then secondly, we have a range, we've identified a range of binding constraints in the key sectors that we've identified. And in particular, we've identified processing, light manufacturing, ICT and tourism, and we've identified binding constraints here. So what are some of the practical steps that we think are important, which we can do on thinking about Monday morning? What is the next step that we think are really important? So first of all, what is really key is to foster this debate on inclusive growth, job creation and transformation. That's really embedded, and everybody can take a part in that. Job creation seems to me like a very important part of this, and it's good jobs that needs to be created to transform the economy, and having a shared vision, almost as a nation-building project, is really important. That's what we find across countries. If you have that as a nation-building project, it makes implementation much easier. If you don't have it, if there is dissonance, if the discussion isn't around moving the economy ahead to reach targets, the implementation doesn't happen in a coordinated and targeted way. And practical steps, other practical steps that are important is to remove binding constraints in a range of sectors. We'll be talking more on that in the afternoon, but this is around the question as to what creates jobs. Is it the supply of skills that is needed, or is it actually the importance of tackling constraints on investment that will then bring in business to the country, more investment, which will then help to create jobs, and then you can do all the job training and then build skills in that way. Or is it a bit of both? Okay, I'll be talking a bit more about the vision. So I've got 3 slides on that. That is really important. And in that, I'm dealing with 4 issues. First of all, what will happen if we project past performance forward? Will we graduate to become a lower middle income country? We'll be talking about what are some of the challenges in this, and we'll be discussing what are some of the sectors that are desirable, or have desirable properties that can lead to inclusive growth, but also lead to a transformation of the economy, i.e. more productivity. And then we'll be talking about tackling binding constraints to further growth. So let's think about what's happening if we project past growth forward. So if we project past growth forward, you get the line, the bottom line, green line, or the bottom line. It's 4% growth that we've seen over the last 10, 15 years. If we project that forward, then Nepal is on track to become a lower middle income country, i.e. To reach the $1,026 per capita in real terms in 2030. That is one way to target that has been discussed. There are other targets, of course, LDC graduation is another target that's been discussed. And some would argue that actually the target to become a middle-income country isn't the low middle-income country target of 1,026, but actually we need to reach 2,500 GDP per capita. Well, that is only going to be reached if we grow at 8% a year from now on by 2034. And so that's much more challenging. So that's the other target based on 8% growth. And well, we need to change a lot in the economy if we're going to reach 8%. So it is on track to become a low middle income country. But at the same time, there are significant challenges. So one way to discuss this is about productivity change. And there has been insufficient productivity change. And one way to look at that is to look at where are the jobs. And most of the jobs at the moment are still in agriculture. So that's the green bar, cumulative employment share, most of the jobs are in agriculture, 70%. These are actually also the ones that are the least productive. That's the vertical axis, the relative productivity axis. It's the lowest productivity. The other sectors, which are higher bars, they are the ones that are higher productivity, but there are fewer jobs in them at the moment. So one way to think about it is to move jobs out of low productivity agriculture into maybe higher productivity agriculture, but also to other sectors like manufacturing, ICT and tourism. This is one way to look at future growth, and there are of course other characteristics of sectors. So we've looked at the various sectors and the contribution it can bring. So we looked at inclusivity, whether there are the percentage of jobs taken by women, or by informal workers, or by rural workers. We've looked at whether a sector is a high productivity sector, so manufacturing is more productive than agriculture, for example. ICT is more and more productive. We've looked at the past growth record and the ability to create jobs. And we've looked at what the government and other documents have suggested about what are the promising sectors going forward. And by doing this, and by taking this all together and doing simulations, and you can find those simulations in the paper, we've suggested a range of sectors to look into more detail. So the promising sectors for the future that have desirable properties are agri-processing, so the more productive side of the agriculture. We've also identified, and it's an inclusive sector, so it creates a lot of jobs, including for women, so it has desirable properties. The other sector that we think are really important is the manufacturing sector. It can help you to export, but more productive. It has also created quite a number of jobs, so that's also important. ICT sector has been growing fast. It is something for the future. E-commerce could be something for useful for a landlocked country, very important. And tourism is also a promising sector as well. Okay, that brings me to the end and to think about what is next. So one of the things that we are arguing for in this particular paper, and the other one is more about specific constraints at sector and firm level, we've argued that it's really important to think around a vision. And a vision, a practical vision, whereby you think about growth in particular sectors and think about what are the binding constraints for the future. And if that's really embedded throughout, it makes implementation so much easier. And we suggested 4 particular sectors to look into in more detail. And so to conclude here, is what we think is really important is to foster a political debate around job creation, about economic transformation. And by doing this, you think also a bit more about what are the constraints to job creation, and what is the role of the private sector in this. Of course, the private sector is the job creator here, but the public sector can be really important in fostering the right framework through general enabling conditions, but also through targeted interventions as well. And we will talk about those targeted interventions in the second session. So thank you very much.
Job creation, and also many also discussed on the role of private sector as well as role of public sector in job creation and economic transformation. Okay, as per our schedule, we have 20 minutes for discussions on the presentation of Dirk. So I would like to open the floor clarification. As I open the floor, and I request you to be short and precise. Please.
So just to say, the main...
Okay, please.
And plus there is a huge mass involved in that sector. So when we are talking about inclusiveness, if we left out this sector, probably we are excluding the workers who are involved in that sector. So I was just wondering why we haven't identified these construction sectors as potential growth sector.
No questions? Then please, Dirk.
Infrastructure issues, transport infrastructure, energy, and the like. But in terms of sectors, so we identified a range of factors around the sectors, and so there are certain sectors that create a lot of jobs, and there are certain sectors that are more productive, and there are certain sectors that are seem to be more promising for driving transformation in the future. So construction is one sector which has a number of desirable properties, and if you look at this here, it's all a bit in the medium, and so it doesn't. It has created jobs. It has grown. Of course, at the moment there are specific opportunities in reconstruction, and that's of course important. If you think about driving transformation in the long run, you need to think about what are the high productivity sectors. Think about sectors that can export as well, because that will help you to raise productivity, and that is important to transform your economy. So construction can help in that. It's an enabling sector, but in the longer run, you also need sectors that can transform from the economy. So yes, construction has desirable properties, but we think that there are these other sectors like around agri-processing and others that are a bit more promising, in particular through the exporting route, for the productivity route. And this has also been identified as a promising sector in a range of other sectors, or in a range of other studies. So there isn't necessarily lots of news in it either, I would say. So yes, construction is important, but I think the other sectors you need to think to move come forward.
Yeah. That you have choose the ICT sector, and so that is one of the plus point I see in your presentation. But will our planning commission will take into consideration? So I have a very big question mark regarding this, because ICT sector is not in the priority of our government. So this is the first issue you have to address, I think. So identifying this is very good. At least in the table we're talking about ICT now. Before it would not have been entered into the table, but now this is starting to enter in the table. But will planning commission will take that action? So I have a very big question mark. So honorary member, our vice chairman is there. So there are so many question marks regarding the priority of ICT sector, and who will look after the ICT, whether Ministry of Information Communication or Ministry of Science and Technology. There are very, very big question marks. So once we clear the vision of the country, then only it would be better to discuss about all these issues, I think. So that is my concern. Thank you very much.
One is that it is overall enabling for the economy. So if you have better ICT in your country, it enables other sectors to become more productive as well. But it also can also become an important export sector in its own right. And getting that right is important, particularly for a landlocked country where transporting goods out of the country is more difficult than perhaps exporting a service online, whether it's software, whether it's call centers, whether it's a range of other factors. So ICT is important for those two factors: general enabling and a high quality job creator. But you need to be ready for it as well. So if you think about e-commerce more generally, it's a new area to be looking at, and in particular in this globalized world, if you're not ready for it, you might be left behind. And actually prepared, so you need to think about what are the constraints to developing the ICT sector, and if you leave other countries develop it, ICT laws, data protection laws, other binding constraints, other countries will move ahead, and you get a greater digital divide, and you get more inequality across countries. However, on the other hand, if you're ready and you are prepared to invest in this for the future, and you see this as one of the future sectors, you can become part of this global economy, global digital economy. That's really important. And I agree very much with your point that you're saying, is that once it is identified as a priority sector, an area, and it's embedded in society as it being an important sector, then yes, you may have different actors that do play a role, and in e-commerce there are different actors that do play a role, different ministries, different actors and so on. Then if you do see it as a future sector, the coordination becomes so much easier around this, and that's when countries have really thought about priority sectors and really moved beyond thinking about a general enabling environment and really help with targeted facilitation in a market-friendly way, based on a consensus view in society. That's when countries have transformed the economy and created jobs. And so I would say that ICT is one of those important sectors.
Nepal Trade Integration Strategy 2016, it has identified one of the priority area. Is there any legislative gaps? Government is providing and is giving some priority for IT sector.
Can you stand up and say? Well, that was thank you, Dr. Pumena. The migration phenomenon that's happening can that be a source of productivity in Nepal's economy? Because we have seen some evidences of skills move up in the out migration space. Is that going to be sustainable, or do you think that should be considered in some regard?
Very good question, and I think it goes to the heart of a lot of economic. I suppose, yes, I mean, both remittances, migration, return migration could be important for skills development in the country. In the next session is actually also around the challenges that are there. So also both transform your economy and poverty reduction, thanks to remittances, which is very good news, but at the same time, capacities within Nepal and making sure that there are profitable investment opportunities here, tackle the constraints to investment, to targeted keep profitable opportunities here and keep workers here. And I think that is something to think about. So that's the sequence. I suppose that is important. Can we rely on remittances to transform the economy? I think there are going to be question marks there, and I would say focus on high quality job opportunities here in Nepal. That seems really important.
Agriculture sector for a very long time, but if you see in the villages, there is a severe scarcity of labor in agriculture sector. If there isn't any labor in agriculture sector, how we will transform that labor into other sectors? I think we have to think about this matter seriously. Thank you.
And employ other sectors. Very good. Okay. So I mean, I suppose labour scarcity, and I don't think that there is a huge. I'm not aware of there being a huge a huge gap in low-skilled workers. The gap is more into when you think about processing and in agri processing and the skills needed for that. And if you then think about supply skills and training in this, there is if you do it without thinking about profit opportunities for agri processing at the same time, there's a danger that you develop skills and it's not linked to economic activities. That you put too much on the supply side, not linked to the market, and that you then create skills that might not be needed, and they actually go, the skill workers go abroad. So I suppose the trick here is to think about how to incentivize on the job training, and in particular how to incentivize skills that are needed and that can be a complement to creating profit opportunities in, for example, agri processing. So I suppose there are multiple constraints. It is about finance for the equipment that is needed. It is around getting your goods out of the region, out of the country, so the transport infrastructure that's needed. And of course electricity as well, so getting the electricity first. So whether the lack of skills is the main constraint, I'm not 100% sure whether it is the constraint. We'll hear more on that in a minute, but it's the ability to train and think about workers at the same time as the profit opportunity that is important. So there is a major gap in the terms of finding low-skilled workers. There will, at least based on the farm survey that we will hear about later, that doesn't seem to be the case. The case is much more on skilled workers and keeping the skilled workers in the country around profit opportunities.
How can the government of Nepal increase the availability of good jobs? Because that's clearly critical to achieving economic transformation and to helping Nepal meet the objectives it set itself in terms of its trajectory to middle-income country status. But I think the conversation that we've just been having has raised another very important point, which is around a question about how do you make sure that young, skilled people have a viable alternative to migrating in such large numbers. And obviously migration's been a key engine of economic growth and poverty reduction over the past 15 years in Nepal. And it's very important that we think about how to make migration work better for poor people, but it's also very dangerous to have all your eggs in one basket. And you know, with the report suggesting that remittances are falling in the last, reports last week, you know, that potentially brings risks to many aspects of the economy. So I think this conversation is very important from a strategic perspective, but it also has that, it's good to keep that sort of migration lens on it. So, you know, as a DFID office, what are we taking from the reports? How do we read them? I mean, I guess our thinking is really clustered around two key steps. There's a step around, can we say anything about what sectors government should be focusing on to try and drive creation of good jobs, and then what kind of actions and what kind of approaches are most likely to be effective in creating good jobs in those sectors. So the first question, is it possible to prioritise sectors? So there's obviously a school of thought which would say, hey, government aren't good at picking winners, and it should just be left to the market to decide what sector should grow. But I think that you can make the argument, in a sense, started making the argument today, that prioritisation is necessary. So firstly, there's a reality that government needs to invest resources and political capital in providing good investment climates. And if those resources are scarce, it makes sense to focus them on some sectors and some locations. And in some ways, I think this takes us back to the conversation, the point that Dirk made around the need for a kind of a nation-building project, a kind of a political understanding of what the focus is on the creation of jobs. And I think the second really good argument for prioritisation and focusing on some sectors is that the political reality is that you can most effectively make the case for reforms if you can point to specific examples of investment that you could achieve and specific job creation that could be unlocked by those changes. So I think those are two really good reasons for thinking, actually, let's try and prioritise. Now the report sets out a kind of a complicated and rigorous way of thinking about this. And I guess from DFID's perspective, if you really simplify that down to a level that as a head of a country delegation or office I can understand, the two things that strike me are, the first thing is that when we're thinking about prioritising, it's important to think about export-focused job creation, partly because there's good evidence that no country in the world has been able to grow consistently fast without the help of exports, but also because there's really strong evidence that engagement in the export sector does help to drive up firm productivity, so you get this kind of a self-reinforcing cycle. And this feels particularly important because over the last few years there's been a bit of a trend of declining export from Nepal, and there's an urgent need to think about how to make sure that actually going forward Nepal's able to generate foreign exchange that can fund the imports that it needs as well. So if that's the first question, if that's the first kind of criteria that you might use, like where are the export-focused sectors? The second is perhaps around where can you create jobs in a relatively labour-intensive way? Because you need to create sufficient jobs if you're thinking about this kind of nation-building political process. And it seems to me that some of the areas pulled out of this report, for example, light manufacturing and tourism, are potentially great examples of this. So I'm really, really glad that the Vice Chair of the NPC is here today, and I hope that in some ways the analysis on sector prioritisation will be valuable as a small contribution to the very important and strategic work that he is doing on shaping an agenda or shaping an approach to Vision 2030. So the second kind of question I set out that we're thinking about as a DFID office is, if you look at these sectors, what's the best way to increase employment within them? And again, I think there are sort of two routes that you can take to thinking about that. The first is, if you have a sector where the demand for labour is a result of firms facing constraints on labour that are restricting their growth, then the best way to increase employment is to focus on that lack of labour. But if you're facing a sector where there are a broader set of constraints, so infrastructure or the access to finance, broader set of issues, then you need to think about how you would address those constraints. So sometimes a focus on skills is going to make sense, sometimes it's not. And I think that there's quite an amount of evidence from across developing countries that actually it's the lack of labour that can be a key problem. But Nepal is obviously potentially different because of migration. So if you look at the sectors that are analysed in the report, it's quite clear that ICT and tourism are sectors where you have firms which are growing well, firms are hiring workers, wages are going up, and there's a shortage of staff. So in these sectors, it seems to make sense that a market-led approach to skills training might help to make sure that you can maintain a supply of workers which keeps up with demand, you keep wages down, you keep the sector competitive. But in some of the other areas we're talking about, so particularly agro-manufacturing and agro-processing, firms are not growing so fast, wages are stagnant, and it seems likely that the priority is the other constraints, so constraints around infrastructure, for example, and we need to address those constraints if we're going to get businesses growing. And at its most extreme, I think, I've only been here a few months, but I was very lucky. I was able to go to Humla, just possibly got the most delicious apples in the world. Amazing, delicious apples. But there are clearly a lot of constraints which are preventing any sort of processing in a meaningful way there. So it's kind of, you need to think about the answer in the context of the problem that the sector is facing. And I just wanted to say here that I think that special economic zones provide a massive opportunity for addressing manufacturing constraints, since you've got an opportunity to try and generate a supportive environment for light manufacturing and for agro-processing firms. And the passing of the SEZ law and the work that the Ministry of Industry and the SEZ Authority are doing is very exciting, and DFID is very happy to be supporting that. So just to kind of close off, I think that's in a way the way that DFID is thinking about the issues raised by this report. I think it's very important. It's a very useful contribution to a discussion about how we support the government to generate better jobs. But you're the experts on these sectors, so very excited to be here and looking forward to sharing your views and kind of hearing where you disagree with the report or our analysis. And I just finally want to thank ODI and SAWTEE for all the work that's gone into this study. Obviously, to this panel for making time to be here, and to say that I hope that we can move on and have a rich discussion about what this means and how it can be put into practice.
Project for jobs creation. That is basically through creation of sector that creates job in the market. but it is so here the government should provide policy framework for the private sector creation. What could be the pathways for that job creation? Okay, I invite.
We look at it as every year 500,000 young Nepalese come into the job market, and out of that 80% leave Nepal and go away. They probably do not see their future in Nepal, and which I feel is extremely dangerous for our country. And they seek the future in working in 50 degrees or in the Gulf or Malaysia or somewhere else. Now, out of this 20%, so 20% which is being employed in Nepal. Now, if I just have to give a little data on this, which was discussed earlier as well, 96% of the people are in unorganized sector, and what we're talking about is only 4% which is being employed by the organized sector, and which is around 1.2 million people. Now, on the surface, the people who go out, which the remittance they send, this is the backbone of our economy. Had this not happened, we would not have probably survived as a nation, would have been completely in a mess, politically as well as economically. And thank God for the remittances that most of the economic indicators of our country, which I'm sure Dr. Wagle is going to elaborate further, is extremely healthy. We do not have balance of payment problem so far. We of course have a huge trade deficit, but all the other indicators of our economy is acceptable limits. So as we look at it, our economic growth has been 3.54% on an average. The unemployment rate has been around 2%. So on the surface, everything looks fine. But if you really dig inside, things are extremely dangerous. Like for example, the contribution of the industry from 15% in our GDP has reduced to almost 4%. And this is just one of the examples I would like to give. And also the example is over dependency on remittance can be extremely dangerous for the economy, because we have seen if the oil price is going down, or if there are wars, or if there's something happens around the world, we are so over dependent on remittance now that if the growth, which there are indications that the growth is slowing down, and sometimes is below last year figures as well, that if it slows down, there is no substance in our economy to sustain. So it is very, very important that we must create value in Nepal. We must create jobs in Nepal. As I mentioned, the organized sector in Nepal contribute 60% of the GDP, and only the 40% is through the unorganized sector. And out of the 60% organized sector, as I told earlier, it's only 4% of the total employment. And here I see that the improvement is important. And also the fact that the 96% of the people unorganized, there is hardly any labor law or any social security which touches them. We speak about the unions, union being very active in Nepal, and what they only look at is probably the low-hanging fruits, which is the organized sector. And they have no capacity or political will, I feel, and this is what I've been telling them as well, to go to the unorganized sector and to make sure the labor law is implemented, and the social security, whenever it is, it's in the last stages that social security is, it should be, whenever they're entitled for that, and they should get that. Now, I would like to mention what are the challenges for the private sector. Broadly speaking, the challenges have changed over the last 2-3 decades. Sometimes, like for example, if around 1 year back, if you would have asked any person from the industry or from the trade that what is your number one challenge, he would have probably said energy. And energy, we were running our industries on generators, and which was very expensive. We are signatories to the WTO and so many other trade regulations. So obviously, there was no equal playing field because we were running our industries on generators, so obviously our cost was higher. We could not seek that protection from the government that, okay, because our cost is higher, you need to protect us more in terms of duties and things like this. And obviously this was a very, very big challenge for our industry. The other challenges obviously was extremely long transition period. We spoke about almost 10 to 12 years of political upheaval in the country. Before that as well, we did not have a stable government for a long, long time. And if you do not have stable government, any large investments will not feel confident about investing into the country. And this has been one of the challenges, that economic agendas were never on priority. It was only about political agendas. It was probably just a rhetoric, that if we would speak to the politicians, and when they speak to the public, they say, now's the time for looking at creating jobs, now is the time for creating opportunities and looking at economic agendas. But we all know that it was just political agendas. They had no time, and for obvious reasons, because the whole situation was so fluid that they did not look into economic agendas. Now, the other challenges of the industry was various laws which was not investment friendly. Now you talk about the labor law, or you talk about Industrial Enterprise Act, or the Foreign Investment Act, or the Company Act, or many other acts which was related to the private sector. FNCCI has been working very closely with the government, saying that you need to make these acts investment friendly. And I'm happy to say, most of the challenges, as I mentioned, the power, the challenge of the political transition hopefully is going to be over in the next 2 months, God willing. And of course, the most of the laws, we have worked together. We have a new labor law, which we feel is really going to be, it's very. This is going to improve the labor and the employers' relationship. It's been very balanced labor law which has come, and we've worked closely with the unions and the government to form this the new labor law, as well as the the Industrial Enterprise Act, the new Company Act, or the Foreign Investment Act. These are either on the last stages, or it's been the law is already there, and I have to say they're very positive. Of course, this needs to evolve with time, and but what we have today, we feel relatively comfortable that it's going to be investment friendly. There could be, obviously the political transition had another problem in the labor market, that people were falsely empowered. There was a period in Nepal where most of the industries would go into strikes. There was absolutely lawlessness, and the politicians would give a false sort of empowerment that this is your investment, and you need to take over, and most of the industries actually closed down, and that is one of the reasons the contribution of the industry in the total GDP went down. But I have to say this, that now we feel there's a new era, and all the unions speak far more responsibly, and they really feel its need to create jobs. And because I have been the chairperson of the Employees Council, we have worked very closely with the unions, and now I feel it's a completely different sort of level they speak on. It's extremely responsible, and these are the positives which is coming out of the labor union. So as I was telling you that various challenges has been in various periods. I'm happy most of the challenges look like they're getting over, and now that we're having this discussion of creating jobs, I think there cannot be a better time, because the political transition, as I told you, it should be. We should be having national elections as well as provisional elections in 2 months, and we probably will be forced now by design to speak on economic agendas. Every province will have to push economic agendas to generate industries and employment in their province. So I feel the whole system, I feel very positive that this is the right time. And the challenges of the past has been in the past, we need to look positive. And I could not go through the full presentation. Obviously, it's a very elaborate presentation. You need to go there to really comment on that. But I'm sure we need to work together with FNCCI and with all. We are the only recognized employers council in the country, and all the development agencies, and we need to work together to see that the future, the opportunity which has come now, and we fully utilize that and create jobs in Nepal. Thank you.
Creating job. Thank you, Sekharji. Now I invite our chief guest.
Employment and Arthik Samriddhi. It has become a cliche now. Economic prosperity. They go hand in hand. So it's not the lack of debate, but what I will agree is the translation of those ideas and the translation of the rhetoric into concrete policy ideas, which are then extended to actual implementable, actionable programs and interventions. I think there we are lacking, and that is an area of where we would need to work much more. But recognizing the gravity of this issue, the recognition of the fact that there's outmigration on an epic scale, that the economy is not dynamic enough, that the economy is not transforming at the pace that we all desire, is not happening, is well recognized. And this is where I think your inputs, your studies and your policy, the analytical studies and the policy ideas would be extremely useful to us. And I'll talk a little bit about some exercise that's undergoing inside the government on long-term visioning and how this work actually will help us and fits into our own planning and visioning, and as an analytical sort of firepower to back up whatever programs and ideas that we will bring. Let me also react to a few other issues that came out during the discussions. I think Dirk mentioned whether is it skills that is the lack of skills that is important, or lack of other complementary constraints. I think in Nepal's case it's both, and you did mention whether it's not a dichotomy. It could be both in Nepal. I think that is the case in certain industries, certain sectors, from basic plumbing to semi-skilled sort of manufacturing-oriented jobs. There's an absolute shortage of skills. But there are larger constraints, as other speakers have talked about: infrastructure, policy hurdles, regulatory barriers as well. So I think on a case-by-case basis, we have to unpack the sectors, the sub-sectors, and then tackle what the most binding constraints are. Poverty has fallen in Nepal. Inequality is also stable, but there is lack of a dynamic job creating process. Remittances have played a big role, but remittance is not the only story. There are 4 or 5 other things that have actually helped us achieve fast and rapid poverty reduction. I think the role of the public sector investment is extremely important. There's a lot of wastage, there's a lot of leakage, there's a lot of mistargeting, yet this poor country, this poor government has made it a habit to apportion a large section of its annual budget to public sector, so health and education. So despite the weaknesses, this sustained pouring of resources into these relatively inefficient sectors has nonetheless produced results that have helped us achieve first-generation development challenges. So if you're talking about education, the enrollment challenges has almost been met. Primary school enrollment with gender parity is almost 97-98%. Now there's the second generation challenge of ensuring higher quality. So kids are going to school but not learning much. So the second generation challenge is where we would need to make bigger progress. On health, for example, life expectancy, average life expectancy has jumped from about 54 in 1992 to about 71. 69 for men and 72 for women. So this kind of first generation challenge has been successful because of sustained public engagement. There's been a lot of institutional innovations, especially on health and education. We no longer take a piecemeal project-based approach. It's a programmatic approach. There are more than 50,000 female health community volunteers who have helped lower infant mortality, maternal mortality. So a lot of these changes are happening through institutional innovations and policy responses. There's also private provisioning of basic social services. So together with this, these 4 or 5 factors that I mentioned, and of course remittance is the big elephant in the room. So it's not just because of remittances that we've seen the kind of development achievements, especially on the social sector. I think one issue came up on labor shortage. It is true that on the skilled labor front, there's a massive shortage, which is mostly being filled by incoming migrant workers from northern parts of India. But if the 60% of our population is aged between 15 and 64, the working age population, slightly more than 60%. And about a third of that is out of the country. So there is a big labor shortage. So and the people have come out of agriculture, but they are not being absorbed in the modern sectors, which is also fueling this big out-migration. The issue of deindustrialization is there. If you take industry as a category, which includes water and energy and other utilities, then the share in the economy is larger. But if you focus on a subset within industry, which is the manufacturing, Utpadan Mulak Udyog, which is what we call in Nepali, then it has shrunk in about 20 years from 11% to about 5.5% now. So that's a big challenge. But this phenomenon of deindustrialization or premature deindustrialization, we're also seeing in other countries. So this demands a recognition of some structural changes in the way we understand manufacturing itself. Right? It's becoming much more skills intensive. Characteristics that we used to attribute to manufacturing are now relevant to some services sectors. So the large retail and wholesale service sectors resemble characteristics that we used to associate with manufacturing, this ability to absorb labor force in large numbers and things like that. I very much agree with Rurik, who talked about the importance of exports, but again, in the 21st century, exports have to be tied with investment. So with FDI, then exports can take off. There was a period when we looked at trade and investment as substitutes, but in today's world, I think they are very much tied together, intricately linked with each other. And a lot of the export successes in Asia have been possible because of inward direct investment. And the beauty of inward direct investment is they bring a market with them. So even if a brilliant Nepali exporter has an amazing product that the world can appreciate, it's extremely difficult for that person to form the networks, clear all the regulatory barriers, the linguistic hurdles, the cultural, the regulatory, to navigate that maze is extremely difficult. So I think exports, trade and investment have to be pursued in tandem. And I was very happy to hear from Shekhar Golchaji, who can speak with authority on the kind of partnerships that the government and the private sector have entered into and have actually delivered over the last few years on the legislative front. So the issue of the SEZ Act, the Labour Act, the Industrial Enterprises Act, the Company Act, the Public-Private Partnership Act, Social Protection Act, which has come recently, trade and FDI acts which are in the offing. These are, I think, legislative reforms that have happened even in a climate of great political uncertainty and great political transition over the last 2-3 years. And if you go back and review some of the growth diagnostic studies that DFID has funded and the Asian Development Bank has funded, the US, the MCC has done in the last 7 or 8 years, what were the 4 or 5 big constraints that these reports repeated or reaffirmed one after the other? Shortage of energy, connectivity, the high cost of transport, partly because of our structural handicap or as a result of landlockness, but also because of the poor connectivity issues. Third was policy inconsistency or policy instability. And the fourth was labor problems. Energy issue almost solved. Labor issue not prominent anymore, as Mr. Golsa said. Policy consistency, well, we're sort of finding a way to ensure a degree of continuity, policy continuity, even in a climate of political instability, but that will change come January 2018 with a new government in place, hopefully with a big hoping mandate to rule for 5 years. So I think there's a lot of optimism to be had on that front. On connectivity, things are moving, but not at the pace that we all desire. And there, as a landlocked country, fundamentally handicapped to trade and to engage with the outside world, with extra costs on a lot of these things, I think there's a more urgent agenda, not just on road connectivity, building of expressways, but also air connectivity, cheaper air connectivity, which is then tied to our anticipated success or amplification of our ambition in the tourism sector. So those are my quick reactions to some of the issues that I heard from the floor and from the dais. Now let me talk a little bit about what the NPC is doing and the Vision 2030 or the long-term visioning, the importance of long-term visioning and the embedding of many of the sectoral strategies in that larger picture, larger vision has been mentioned. I think we are also trying to change the NPC. There's a big process of administrative restructuring, or if you want to be, or really an institutional rupture that's happening in Nepal right now. There are about 31 ministries in existence, which will now suddenly shrink to about 15 or 16. Hopefully a stable government with a big electoral mandate after 2 months. Recognition that we're in it together, so hence the hostility of the trade unions to engaging in a more constructive dialogue with the private sector and the government. The Social Security Act and other Labor Act, there's being evidence of the fact that attitudes are changing and shifting. So I do agree that 2018 can be that critical juncture for Nepal when we really embark on this ambitious economic agenda. So timed with that is our own restructuring at the NPC. We have already drafted a new executive ordinance for National Planning Commission. It is now doing the rounds in some ministries, Ministry of Law, Ministry of Finance, who are obligated to provide comments. Within a month or so, we will bring it to the cabinet, and a new institutional organization will be announced. And I don't want to go into the details, but basically there are two main functions of a body like an advisory body like the National Planning Commission. It's the generation of ideas, putting those ideas into coherent visions and long-term plans. And second, we don't do implementation directly, but there's a big problem in implementation, which is coordination failure. So I think NPC, exercising its power of convocation as a body that's chaired by the Prime Minister, can exercise that role. And this is, in my brief tenure as Vice Chairman, this is one role that I found extremely rewarding. And if one is, takes it up with vigor, with that passion and jeep, can actually solve many problems. Because government entities have their own silos, they inhabit their own turfs, they don't talk to each other. So a body like the NPC can really solve many of the coordination failures. So generation of ideas and coordination failures are the two main functions of the Planning Commission. And we should cut down on things, retail engagements in the routine kind of program approvals and petty meddling in affairs of the ministries. So that's the direction we're taking. Now, finally, we are now working on a vision 2030 or Nepal 2030, which will be also aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. It's our solemn international commitment. We will align this framework with the SDGs, but SDGs cannot be our indigenous or homegrown strategy, hence the need for a parallel or a complementary approach. And the reason the complementary approach is necessary is because we have our own set of peculiar development challenges, some of which have been mentioned. So the approach we're taking here is, we need to accept or recognize what the big trends are in the Nepali economy and the Nepali society. Then we need to really find out what the big enablers are and what the big enablers are going to be over the next 12 or 13 years. Then we go into the means. How do we climb that ladder? If we have the end goal in sight, what are the different 7 or 8 or 9 themes that we really focus on, and what are the big risks that we face? Not everything will be rosy, not everything will go according to plan, and how do we plan to mitigate some of the risks that we anticipate? Now, one departure that we're thinking about is maybe it is worthwhile for this vision document to take a thematic approach rather than a sectoral approach. So if you look back at all our 14 periodic plans, going back to 1956 to the one that was announced in 2016, the 14th periodic plan, the tendency in Nepal, the default habit of our economists and planners is to take a sectoral approach. And in fact, this has gotten worse in the last few years. We no longer even take a sectoral approach, we take a ministerial approach. So if the Ministry of Water and Sanitation, Water Supply and Sanitation, which a year ago was part of Ministry of Urban Development, now the silos, the walls are thickening, and the approach is they don't even take a holistic urban development perspective, just those pipes and sanitation that matters to them. So we need to depart from this approach and really take a thematic look at our development challenges. Now, what are some of the big five or six things that we notice in our economy? The first one is really this process of atypical structural transformation, so which is extremely relevant to the theme that we're discussing. And why is it atypical? It is atypical because the kind of development process that we've seen in Western Europe, in the advanced world, in the OECD countries, and more recently after the Second World War in many of the Asian countries, is this linear process of graduation from agriculture to industry and then to services. That's not what we're seeing in Nepal and a few other countries in Africa. People are moving out of agriculture, but they are not being absorbed in the modern industrial sector. As I mentioned earlier, the modern industrial, you normally expect a manufacturing hump in the long development trajectory. In Nepal, we're not seeing that. Now, in fact, instead of a hump, it's a hollow, it's a void. And as the GDP numbers show, our contribution of the manufacturing sector has halved in the last 20 years. But as people move out of agriculture, this is the first sector that should have absorbed those people. And it is because of the absence of jobs in that sector that is fueling this process of out-migration. And even in the services sectors, which traditionally used to be thought of as a high productivity sector, there's a lot of low productivity subsectors that have emerged, petty trade, a lot of informalization, hence the kind of productivity boost that we would have expected with the burgeoning of the services sector in Nepal, which is also remittance fuel, is not happening. So people are moving in and out of agriculture, fleeting move in and out of agriculture. and were otherwise being absorbed by the informal sector or moving overseas for temporary jobs. So this process of structural transformation, what can we do about it? How much is it a cause of indigenous Nepali policy failure, lack of dynamism on the part of the private sector, or the structural characteristics of the industries themselves? I was teasing Sekharji about the logo that he's wearing on his jacket. If you look at the emblem of industrialization in Nepal, is this old factory from the 1950s and 60s with a big chimney and smoke coming out. So it has to be a factory. That's not the model of industrialization in the 21st century. You can specialize in parts and components, do it well, produce it en masse, and subject to these connectivity problems and some of the border hassles being solved, connectivity, air connectivity, land connectivity, rail connectivity issues, and our joining or becoming part of industrial, international or regional production networks or value chains. A lot of the old modes of producing are actually now defunct. The second big shift that is going on in the Nepali society is, of course, migration. We've talked about this extensively. The move is from the rural to urban areas. Now, by sheer statistical artifact, we've turned 60% of Nepal's population into urban dwellers, just by it jumped from 19% to 37%, and then from 37% to almost 60% now. So people who live in the so-called Nagarpalikas today, according to our classification, almost 60%, and that trend will continue. But the migration from rural and urban areas from within Nepal to, of course, overseas, both as temporary migrants and also as permanent migrants, who have now formed crossed a critical threshold of at least 1 million people who've acquired permanent residency in other countries. Third shift is young demography. It is a big factor that is changing our economy, our society, and has a lot of, I look at it more positively, of course. It can still be used as a resource to make that leapfrogging over the next 12, 13 years. The median age is 21, 22. There are studies that have come out, co-authored by the National Planning Commission, that say that we will probably enter a phase of aging only around 2028, 2030, and we will become an aged society only after 2054. This is not the luxury that many of the countries now enjoy. Many of the Western rich countries have exhausted their demographic dividend. They are now an aging society, but Nepal has that last hope remaining if there's a conducive environment in the economy that this labor force, young labor force, can still be utilized much more productively until 2030, but also moderately up to the mid-2050s. Increased connectivity is another big change that is happening in Nepal. I've said this in previous events. In 1991, when we opened up, when we embraced multi-party democracy, the number of landline connections was about 71,000. Today, the cell phone subscription in Nepal exceeds the size of the population, almost 30 million cell phone subscriptions. But that's the digital connectivity. Even physical connectivity, there's rural trails, rural roads. One can quibble about the way many of these rural roads are made, are built in a destructive, environmentally destructive manner. We have now 13,000 kilometers of Pakka roads and about 80,000 plus of these rural roads, which are seasonal in nature. Nonetheless, if you talk to these freshly elected Vada Adhyakshas and Gampalika Adhyakshas, one thing I find quite amusing is they say, hang on, I have to park my motorcycle first before I take your call, talk to you. So that shows that these guys are just going around in their bikes, even in the most remote parts of the world. So this aspect of digital and physical connectivity is there. And the biggest shift of all is our move from a unitary to a federal system of organizing political preferences. This has massive implications for the way we engage in local development, and this has to be recognized. What are some of the big enablers going forward? I think digitization, this technology. Somebody was talking about ICT earlier. This will allow us the opportunity to leapfrog, clean up our governance, ensure a greater degree of financial inclusion. So this will remain a big resource for the development pathway going forward. Hydropower is the next one. Big potential for Nepal to meet absolutely all our energy needs through clean source of energy, through hydropower and modestly through solar and wind. This will be an extremely important resource, not only to power that revival of manufacturing, but also to brand ourselves in the world economy. Our proximity to India, China, Southeast Asia and the Middle East will be extremely important. Is a valuable resource that we must exploit, not just for trade and investment, but also for middle class, high-end, higher-end tourism. The availability of private and concessional financing. This is also an amazing resource that we must tap into. Our attractive geography and landscape diversity will open up a big opportunity in the tourism sector to make that leapfrogging into a higher-end kind of a tourism model. Our history of community organization and Nepal's brand value in the world community will also be a great enabler. What are the big means? What are the 7 or 8 means that we need to focus on? I think productivity is the big theme that has come up today. But rather than talking about productivity in isolation in manufacturing and in agriculture, I think we need to take a coherent thematic approach. Which are the most productive sectors? How do we adopt high-yield technologies in agriculture and manufacturing? What kind of smart industrial policy do we introduce? How do we take great pride in Nepal for saying that our forest coverage is now 45% of our territory, but almost very little of that is actually commercially exploited. So, how do we approach revenue extraction from the management of the commons? That's an important issue. Second one, again related to what we are talking about today here, the big theme is enhancing formality. So this has been mentioned by speakers before me. Only 4% of Nepali labor force is engaged in formal sector. This is extremely important. Unless we expand the size of the registered private sector, we cannot talk about large-scale job creation. That is decent. But this is also important to have a sustainable base of taxation. Because it's very hard to tax the informal sector. Right now, remittance is fueling a lot of imports, which we tax, and which has led to a buoyant growth in revenue, through which we're funding quite generously, all these social expenditure programs. But the issue of sustainability remains. So we need a homegrown, broad-based, indigenous source of taxation that can only come when the size of the formal private sector expands. So this formalizing our labor force, formalizing our economy will be the second big theme. Third is wider connectivity, of course. Again, ICT and digital integration into the global economy, but also integrated planning of transport networks. I was amused yesterday to learn that a lot of the road network planning that we do, even to this day, dates back to the 1960 government led by B.P. Koirala. Road RTO, Road Transport Traffic Organization. So that original vision was paved then, and we're still tinkering with that 60-70-year-old plan. But nonetheless, this vision of integrating our transport networks, communication networks, building of cities, industrial clusters, industrial corridors, will be part of this big agenda of wider connectivity. Of course, none of this will materialize unless we have effective governments, now at 3 different tiers: federal government, provincial government, and the local governments. Issue of inclusive, accountable, effective governments, making sure that these governments function and actually provide the kind of public services that the Constitution expects them to will be really important. Higher quality education and skills. Goes without saying why that is important. Healthier population, affordable, universal, high-quality healthcare. That's a direction that we're moving towards. As you know, the government recently brought out the health insurance program, which will eventually be rolled out to the entire country over time. fairer social mobility. I think that is extremely important for a diverse country like Nepal. How much can we afford? What can we afford? Already we are the most generous welfare state in South Asia, which is an irony for a poor country. We spend about 4% of our GDP on social protection schemes, including pensions, including civil service pensions. So both insurance and social protection measures. How do we, and it seems if we continue the current trend of revenue collection, which is susceptible to external shocks, nonetheless we are affording. And if we cut down on the waste and the leakage through smart cards, get a greater deployment of ICT, bank accounts for everyone, cut out the middleman and the leakage in the bureaucratic pipe, bureaucratic chain, I think we can actually afford to be a compassionate society where we take care of the most vulnerable segments of our people. And if you read the political manifestos of many political parties, you find a great degree of commitment to this issue. The next theme is greener economy. And this is where we really need to set out bold ambitions to transition away from fossil fuel and towards less polluting technologies in transportation, in industry, and even in agriculture. And perhaps our greatest strength, our source of national pride, is protection of natural and cultural heritage, which would also need to be a big part of our Nepal 2030. This touches on both the non-tangible heritage of tradition and cultures, but also the tangible heritage that we all see and feel and experience. What are the big risks going forward? I think geofragility is one. Earthquakes, landslides, floods. This is a recurring phenomenon, almost appears mundane, but huge catastrophic losses. I don't need to tell you about the damage that the earthquake of 2015 did. Just 2 or 3 months ago, the floods have actually cost us a tremendous lot. In a few days, we will release the final outcome of the total damage and losses that the floods did in the Tarai and the Pradesh, and the numbers are quite staggering. Climate change, we're not a contributor to climate change, but we will feel the brunt of it when our glaciers melt and our beautiful Himalayas become uglier. There are changes to our monsoon patterns, which will indeed affect our hydro power plants and agriculture productivity, impacts on public health through heat waves and disease vectors. I think this will impact us in big ways. But it's not just the greenhouse gases, and informed by the work that's been done at EC Mode, for example, the greater salience is of short-lived climate pollutants, SLCPs. Pollution today in Lumbini, the birthplace of Lord Buddha, is worse than in Ratna Park, the heart of Kathmandu. Not because of indigenous pollution, but because of imported pollution. So this is where I think regional solutions are also important. We cannot do much about the global agenda, although we are signatories to the Paris Accord, and we will do our part. But it's the bigger culprits that need to be much more proactive on this. But on the SLCPs, I think there is a regional solution. It's a regional problem which demands a regional solution. I think the third risk is poorer federal governance. This could all blow up. This could all collapse. In terms of the fiduciary practices, in terms of the ideological swings and the policy instability that will now be amplified at the local level, and the lack of conflict resolution mechanisms. We don't have a long history of resolving conflicts through the courts by enforcing gentlemen's agreements or contracts between parties. We often resort to brute force, and that is a big threat. But the fiduciary aspect of whether we can sustain this massive expansion of sub-national government will remain a big challenge. But if we manage it well, if the constitutional safeguards are honored, if the constitutional provisions are are executed in good faith, I think this can also be an opportunity for expediting rural economic growth, creating rural jobs, make sure that our villages are not deserted, and things like that. Finally, the big risk for Nepal is neighborhood effects. We are a small country, sandwiched between two large emerging giants, and there are conflicts beyond our borders that could spill over. There are macroeconomic policy constraints that we have to accept. The tying of the Nepali rupee with the Indian rupee through the Belt and Road Initiative. The Chinese want a degree of financial integration with all their neighbors. So these are issues that we need to grapple with. Infrastructure constraints. We may build a world-class expressway from Kathmandu to Madhes, but if the road from Roxor to Kolkata is horrible, it will nonetheless impact our costs, trading costs, business costs. And so this issue of cross-border infrastructure sharing, importance of regional infrastructure building is an extremely important one for a landlocked country like Nepal. And finally, transboundary pollution, which I alluded to earlier. So these are at the level of ideas. We are working on fleshing these out, but the challenge, the proof of the pudding is in actual implementation. And it is another cliche in Nepal that, the ideas are good, everything is thought out, but it's the implementation where we lack. And this is where I think we also need another departure, set of departures. That traditional bemoaning, it's where one gets tired of it. So the innovative way to look at it is, how do we ensure policy stability? How do we ensure governance stability? What are some of the little things that can be done to ensure policy stability, even in a climate of political instability? So this is a theme that I started with, and I think studies such as these, policy recommendations that studies and our development partners engage us in, need to be creative and innovative and really take on this challenge head on. And if Belgium can, run smoothly without a government, if Australia can have 5 or 6 changes in government in 5 years, Italy, Japan, period of high growth that they went through in the 70s, 80s, also marked by frequent changes in government. And what were some of the stabilizing institutional factors? Is it something to do with the civil service, something to do with defined tenure terms? Even in Nepal, we went through an ugly phase in the way we handled our monetary policy through the central bank. Even the governors were subject to political swings, but now it's enshrined in the act of the Nepal National Bank that you can't remove governors. And since then, we've had these fairly stable terms that the governors have exercised, which has helped at least manage that particular institution smoothly. So, what can we learn from other countries that have gone through similar problems? So this is the kind of a tricky knot that we have to unravel for Nepal. The second is, often our well-wishers say, these are the 101 things that you ought to do, and then things should be good. That's not the luxury we have. How do we navigate what economists call a second-best environment, right? When things are context-specific, the government failures are country-specific, the kind of market failures are country-specific, which can't be removed in the short term. So it's not a forced order, the second-order institutional setup that we inhabit. And it is in these instances where some of the best practices can actually can help in some ways, but it cannot be transported wholesale into this peculiar context. And the third is really, there's a lot of issues about special economic zones. The argument that I love about the special economic zones is, ideally you would want the whole country to have world-class infrastructure, world-class regulations, world-class skills. Since you can't do that for the whole country, for a country at a stage of development that Nepal is in, let's start with a small enclave where you can actually do it. Hence, so 24-hour water supply, electricity, security, childcare facilities, proximity to the ports, good roads, and let's get that enclave going with with some of these world-class facilities that will ease the industrial constraints elsewhere. Similar to that logic is I think we can in Nepal look for and emulate and then scale up islands of excellence. I don't want to go into the details, but there are many, and this is where I think a partial equilibrium approach. You look at sector by sector, subsector by subsector, case by case, rather than talk about the entire economy. Because the general equilibrium challenges are much more complex. The partial equilibrium problems are where you start. And once you have these islands of excellence, these success stories, then through the media, through events like this, one can disseminate. And if it can happen here, why can't we do it here? And this is where some of the policy, the innovative policies can also be replicated, modified, adjusted, and then executed. So those are some of my thoughts. It's a wonderful event. Thank you to SAWTEE and ODI for your hard work. As I mentioned at the outset, I haven't read your documents, but I did read the summary. I do expect them to be very, very valuable to our work. Even though we will take a thematic approach, we will need sectoral stories, sectoral evidence to back up those overarching themes as we come up with a coherent narrative for Nepal to embark on over the next 12 or 13 years. Thank you very much.
And work on that new normal. Well, we have very rich discussion over here, and I don't want to summarize those discussion. Maybe I don't have capacity to summarize this very rich discussions. Nonetheless, I would like to highlight a few takeaways. Well, first, creation of good jobs should be at the center of a structural transformation and development process. But creation of good job is not an automatic byproduct of growth process. Thus, here maintaining status quo in policy agenda will not deliver. We need to design and implement a vision for a typical structural transformation and job creation, which requires political will and commitment. Second, the commitment to create good job requires a series of coordinated and coherent policies in many fronts. It may be in agriculture production, it may be in public investment, or it may be industrial policy, it may be a pro-employment, fiscal and monetary policy, for example, a low interest rate, or very competitive exchange rate regime, or maybe a low inflation rate. And much more importantly, we need to have policies that is doing business. And third to take away is, here jobs, it's not the issues of market only. It has its own intrinsic value. And job, it delivers individual and social benefits. Job directly contributes to alleviate poverty, to malnutrition, and much more importantly, social injustice. And so it ensures the basic concept of citizenship and also the social inclusion. And it contributes to political stability. That is the measure of things. So, with this note, I thank Honourable Dr. Wagle commitment to work on the structural transformation and job creation. Thank you all. And
A quick overview of the presentation. We start with the question of what creates jobs. We wanted to understand whether it was the supply of skilled labor that would lead to the jobs that Nepal needs, in order to, or actually a combination of both. Whether it's like we talked about earlier, in some sectors it could be more demand-led, in some sectors it could be more supply-led. So to do that, we built an evidence base, firm-level survey for key sectors, which Swarnim will explain shortly about. And after that, we aggregated the findings, both at the sectoral level and in general, to look at the labour market in Nepal. And we'll then be presenting some practical steps that the country could consider moving forward from these results.
I manage the Supporting Economic Transformation Programme at ODI. And we've worked in different countries and looked at different aspects of job creation and economic transformation. And Nepal really is unique in that there is a labour shortage here due to the high levels of migration. So when we first began this project, we did some sort of desk-based research. 4 sectors that were identified in the research presented by Dirk Willem earlier. So we looked at 4 sectors: IT, agro-processing, tourism and light manufacturing. And in January this year we carried out 43 interviews with firms across the sectors in Kathmandu and in Kathmandu. So I did the tourism study, and firstly, for each of the interviews, we asked firms what their views were in terms of the general growth prospects in that industry or sector. And then we asked them questions around their demand for labour, so then their recruitment, what's constraining them from creating more jobs, employing more people. And then we delved more in depth into the supply side. So when they go to recruit people, what are the main sort of skills that they need and what is lacking and what needs to be done. So in tourism, when I asked the question, what do you think needs to be done in tourism? How do you think it's going in terms of generally in Nepal? The growth constraints first mentioned were always the lack of adequate infrastructure. So particularly roads and domestic airports, so allowing tourists to visit some of the beautiful places that are available to visit in Nepal. And the second thing that nearly all the respondents mentioned was that they felt there wasn't enough promotion of Nepal as a tourism destination internationally. So a lot of them provided examples like Thailand, Sri Lanka and the Maldives as being places that also have had instability and natural disasters, but they've still been promoted strongly as tourism destinations by the government at a national level. And a lot of tourism companies felt that that needed to be done here as well. So a key point that came out basically was that job creation and demand for labour in tourism will only increase if there are more tourists. So even though there are signs that their wages have been rising in tourism and there is growth in tourism, there was a fear that this would sort of flatten out and we needed to increase the number of tourists coming into Nepal in the near future. However, once we probed a bit more into their constraints and asked them about labour supply, a lot of the respondents also said there was a problem with the labour supply with not enough skilled and experienced workers, and experience is particularly valued in tourism. Like they want people working in services that have got good language skills and have worked in tourism for a long time. And they've actually seen a trend where even skilled tourism workers are leaving the country to go and work in non-tourism related jobs abroad in the Gulf, which is definitely a problem. So there's a lack of skilled workers and a loss to migration. Another finding was that firms are being forced to hire less skilled workers and train them themselves through on-the-job training. So that also indicates that there is a need for skills training in tourism. And interestingly, one thing that I asked was the fact that there's a lot of tourism schools and a lot of tourism-related degrees and courses. But a lot of the firms that I spoke to were saying that graduates coming out of tourism studies didn't have the practical skills that you needed to work in tourism. So one of the practical suggestions that we had was placement schemes as part of the degrees that they do. So the paper on tourism goes into detail about some of the findings that we had in terms of demand and supply of labour. But the key thing to note was that the tourism industry has an interesting nuance in that even though there are signs that there's not enough skilled labour in tourism, just training them won't be enough. You need to bring in more tourists. And to bring in more tourists, you need to think about infrastructure and promotion of the industry. And I'll pass to Alberto to talk about the other sectors.
Right, so I'm going to now talk about then for tourism. In ICT, the main barriers to further growth are actually related on the infrastructure that's available for it. I'm not just talking about physical infrastructure, but also the business environment that it operates in. There's high costs and inefficiencies in connectivity capacity in Nepal. We're talking about broadband connections requiring multiple backups, multiple lines for ICT firms to operate effectively, not efficiently, but just effectively. That means that they need to invest in redundant capital just to make sure that if something fails, they can fall back on something else, and that increases costs. But at the same time, they also have issues in terms of conducting e-commerce, both buying goods from abroad or services, but also selling their own services abroad. There's some restrictions in terms of foreign exchange controls, limits to FDI repatriation of profits, for example, that disincentivize firms coming in, but at the same time, these kind of limits, especially the forex controls, also make it harder to sell products abroad when you have to go through quite a few regulatory hurdles to do so. And on top of that, there's the fact that the domestic market is quite small. I mean, Nepal is not a big country. It can only require so much ICT services for its own operations. And while that's growing, and growing at quite a strong rate, in fact, Nepal has one of the highest ICT service sectors in the South Asian region, if not one of the highest in the developing country groups as a whole. That's still not big enough to sustain the industry by itself. So that means that it needs to be able to expand to other markets, and that's regional, starting from the regional markets. But because of how ICT services are operating, it doesn't have to stop there. It can be global markets in general. And that's what it really needs to get going in order to expand. And the labour issues reflect the market constraints. Because whilst ICT firms, the ones that we interviewed, said they had no real problems in having a steady influx of young graduates and young trainees joining their firms, the labour gap became apparent at the high levels of experience, where people would skill up, get a few years of experience under their belt, and then move to more remunerative markets, such as the US or in India, where they could be paid more. They would be poached or they would move out, and leaving a gap that needed constant on-the-job training to fill, constant turnover at the medium to high levels. And so that obviously creates costs for firms and doesn't allow that base of experience to be solidified within a particular company. And so that also hinders their growth prospects. And whilst they can do that for a while, it's not a sustainable solution to have to keep training new people to take positions on quite a high, just so frequently. And this is an issue that we also found in some of the other sectors. So it's quite a recurring issue, transversal across the sectors. So, for example, in agro-processing, a slightly different outlook. Whilst the transversal factors were one of the bigger constraints, especially in terms of energy was seen as a first order constraint to the agro-processing firms, and because our agro-processing firms were mainly based in Biratnagar, They seem to feel the lack of energy more intensely than the firms here in Kathmandu. So there's still a divide between energy availability in Kathmandu and energy availability in other regions. So I don't think the energy problem has been solved as much as we would like to believe that. There's still a lot to do there in terms of energy, just to get the demand issues sorted in the country, let alone have enough to then start exporting to the rest of the region. But on top of that, agro-processing, since it works on perishable goods, also felt the transport links were quite a strong inhibiting factor. Weak transport links, which we've talked about in the session earlier, but also for tourism, are quite important factors of that inhibit firm growth. They're having problems really getting the products out there. But on the other hand, that's not to say there weren't any labor issues, and for agro-processing, and similarly, I'll be talking about light manufacturing, there was a problem with getting the people with technical skills, especially around mechanical engineering skills, operation, fixing machines, knowing how quite complicated machinery actually operates. These people were quite lacking. People with these skills were lacking, and so in this case there was the agro-processing firms especially had to had to hire people from neighboring countries to fill this gap. We're not talking about a large amount of people here, but it's still there, and so it's something that needs to be looked at in terms of providing these technical skills. I'm not going to dwell too much on light manufacturing because essentially it has the same problems as agro-processing, except that there's two issues that need to be taken into consideration moving forward for light manufacturing. One, the regulatory law, the laws that govern hiring and firing of workers was cited as quite a big factor in terms of being flexible for these manufacturing firms. They were not able to get rid of workers that they felt were inefficient or hire and then replace them with new workers. That's something that will probably need to be looked at in more detail in the future because it's still not clear whether this is a perception of the firm, whether this is a real hindrance to operations, or whether it is an actual is having a negative effect. So there's still a question there to looking ahead. But also there's issues with limited R&D capacity in the country. That means that a lot of firms rely on foreign R&D, or they have to buy R&D packages. For example, formulas for soaps or cleaning products. They don't develop them in-house, but they have to buy them from abroad, which in some respects is more efficient, but in other respects it also means that it limits the capacity to grow your own product and create your own niche products across the board in light manufacturing. Some firms are starting to, it's not saying it doesn't happen. For example, Gold Star Shoes are starting to look at ways to integrate different processes into its sneakers. Into its shoe production, things like PVC molding that it can then move on to other sectors as well. But this is just a tip, just the beginning. And then there's also the issue of automation that needs to be taken into account, where high turnover of labor, especially at the lower skill levels, which again, there's not much of an issue hiring people at these lower skill levels, but there's a very high turnover rate in it, means that firms are considering more and more to increase their capital intensity of production, which will make them more productive in the long term. This is actually part of the transformative effect of the sector, but it also means that industry is starting to rely more on machinery, and the people that are lacking, that can help them do that, are actually lacking, as we said, for agro-processing, people with the skills that can operate the machinery and to move into high productivity production processes, not just within the sector, but within the firm, just to be able to be more productive in the firm. That can be a problem in the long term. But automation per se is not an issue. If you unlock industry on aggregate, we have, as we said, there's this concave at the moment, it's not convex where it should be in terms of employment and industry, but that's big, I'm saying automation will likely hinder employment. But that's not true, because if the industrial sector takes off, we're looking at greater numbers of people working in the industry on aggregate rather than less people working in just a few firms. With more firms and more production processes as the complexity increases, which is kind of what we're hoping what the country needs to do in the long term. So that's not. So basically, the point from this is that industry still needs to be looked at, and in terms of, but there are some issues in the labour market that need more careful consideration in the longer term.
Alberto, we have come to an end, so maybe you have to wrap up quickly.
Yes, sure. So we then moved on looking at, so this is basically a summary saying what actually affects firm growth. I've gone through most of these points actually. So most of the binding constraints tend to be lack of infrastructure, transport, logistics. There are regulatory issues that we need to look at. And even though these are well-known constraints, the business still has not organized itself to talk to government in an effective way, to have to be able to talk to them and say, we have these issues, what can you do about it? And on the other side of the coin, government has not maybe given enough time of the day to individual business associations to really listen to their concerns. So it's a two-sided coin in that sense, and it's something that really needs strengthening in the country. Business associations could do with a lot of more strengthening here, but on the other side of the coin, government really should start listening and having a positive discussion with them. What can each one do for each other and what the benefits are. But it's important to know that labour skills are important and it provides an additional challenge to firm growth. Whilst relatively unskilled labour is not so much of an issue, technical skills are in short supply, and this emphasises the need to support on-the-job training, especially for the very specific skills that are required for individual firms. And so support on the job training can be quite an important part in alleviating firm issues with skills. And then it's important to note that migration reduces the supply of experienced labour in Nepal. We've talked about this throughout the various panels, and the lack of skill because of migration, tourism and ICT and agro-processing and light manufacturing means that firms need to tackle this problem. It's ineffective. And so this needs to change. It's either a cultural issue and it takes time because given growth, people will remain in the country, but this is an issue that will take time and will be growth-led. You can't stop migration without providing jobs in country. So finally, what are a few practical actions that can be taken forward? Well, obviously you need to have targeted trade-related infrastructure and energy policies that look at what are the barriers in particular sectors and how to target, rather than a blanket approach, target those particular issues. Do you need energy to supply an SEZ? Target that. Do you need roads, like we were talking earlier, that target particular trade routes? Then look at that first, prioritize these, and start alleviating these constraints. Systemic on-the-job training on-the-job training could be made into a more systemic process with universities and high schools actually linking up with firms and getting feedback from the firms as to what skills are needed, but at the same time providing students with the right attitudes to work with these firms. But it needs to be more systemic rather than just ad hoc firms with particular schools. So something more systemic at the institutional level. And at the same time, more institutional, technical and vocational training, rather than blanket skills courses that actually provide technical skills, electricians, engineers, mechanics, that kind of stuff, need to be institutionalized. And not just in Kathmandu, we're talking about these need to be schools across the country, and different schools can target different areas, tourism and tourism-intensive areas, mechanical skills in those areas that rely more on manufacturing and agro-processing, etc. We've talked about foreign exchange restrictions earlier, but this is a big problem moving forward for the ICT sector, as well as for firms that want to sell their goods abroad. So we need to look at the regulations that make it a lot easier for firms to sell their products, but at the same time buy products from abroad. As I said, Nepal is a small country. It cannot meet all its needs internally. So the more open it is, the easier it is for it to get access to other markets, sell its own products to other markets, and at the same time trade for the things that it cannot or should not rather produce itself. And finally, as Sonia already said, there's a knowledge gap in the labour market. The last labour force was in 2008. A new one is urgently needed, but it also needs to take into account more about skills in terms of what the skill levels are in different
For your presentation. I wish I could have more time to listen to your beautiful presentation, but we have limitations which you have outlined are very much the problem of our economy, of our system. But at the same time, fourth largest country. In terms of biodiversity, in terms of potentials, this country is having enormous potential. So Nepal is not, this year we are expecting that it will go a little down. Given an open opportunity for investors and industries like us, the potential for economic growth is huge. We have no choice but to improve regulations. That is where CNI is working with the government. We have had a lot of discussion with the government on how regulatory framework needs to be changed, why we need second or third generation of changes in the legislation, in the policy. And then you will be amazed that this is the country where the macroeconomic stability is one of the strongest in the region. Whether you compare it with India, China, Bangladesh, Bhutan or Sri Lanka, it is one of the best. So there is a whole set of resilience in our economies. That's the reason industries that survived during the last 20 years are growing. They're making profit. Some of the foreign direct investments are the most profitable businesses ever they produced in any global market. So if you look into those brands which are operating in Nepal, they are the most profitable businesses, whether it is manufacturing or service, whether it is banking or many other institutions, whether it is insurance or service industry like tourism. They are making money, they are giving right dividends. The problem that we have is we are connected to the most developed high income economies because of the openness. Our people go to work in a country called Qatar, that is the highest per capita country in the world. So we have to get pennies when we go there, but we are going to a market which is one of the richest in the world. Probably 3 times more per capita income than the United States. So it is huge. So opportunities given in such prominence from Nepal to those markets, our people are going abroad. We have highest number of people taking graduate and undergraduate courses in some of the best universities in the world, whether it is in US or in Australia, whether it is in Japan or UK. People are there, people are spending money for higher education. So given an opportunity to open this country, I think I don't see any problem to bring those people who are qualified, who have had experience, who have had knowledge and zeal to do things in the right way. I fully agree, the knowledge gap is there, the skill sets are definitely poor. That is primarily because we didn't invest in resources for academia, for the academic institutions where we should have given that type of training. Rather, we more focused on social sciences, and that has killed the capacity of producing more technically qualified people in the country, but things will be changing very fast because we are giving this idea to the government. So with these few ideas for you panelists to think about, I move forward and give none other than my colleague on my right, Mr. Richard Howard. He is from ILO. He knows.
We heard earlier this morning that labor-related constraints are no longer identified. Could we return to a situation where we again have very failed industrial relations and where suddenly industrial relations become a major constraint to growth again? I think the challenge or the risk is real. Social security law must be implemented in a timely way. Workers expect social security in return for that possibility that they could lose their jobs when companies downsize, when performance is not sufficient, when there are mergers or companies close. I do not see yet a lot of progress in the implementation of these laws. Regulations are being developed for both the labor law and the Social Security law with the involvement of organizations like CNI and FNCCI and the trade unions. And I feel, from our perspective at ILO, that both the laws and the regulations are compliant with international best practices. But I think there are three important areas in the implementation of the laws that we need to focus on to ensure good industrial relations in the future. And the one is to improving systems of collective bargaining at the factory level. In the past, labor disputes were often driven by the fact that there was a great deal of competition between trade unions at the factory level. So it was very difficult to come up with resolutions to disputes in the factories. So right now we're looking at different international best practices, and we will move forward with supporting the partners to develop improved systems for collective bargaining. Another area for improvement is collective dispute resolution. When large-scale labor disputes do occur, do we have a mediation body or a labor court that can objectively resolve disputes in a fair and transparent way? The perspective from many right now is that we do not yet have that with the existing labor court. So we will pursue opportunities to develop new models and approaches for dispute resolution in line with international best practices. A third area, which I think the study highlights very importantly, the skills issue. A large number of companies in the study are actually training their own workers because they're not getting the skills they need from the TVET system. So a lot of these practical skills, workers even at entry level or higher skill level, don't really have the skills that companies need. Everywhere I go, companies say this. And once they train these workers, we see from the study is that many of them leave to seek higher income opportunities. So this does point to the issue of how wages are set in various sectors, how minimum wages are set. The procedures used in Nepal now are far away from international best practices. So we will in the next year carry out studies and bring in top specialists in the area of wage setting mechanisms to look at setting approaches to setting wage levels that will hopefully keep those skilled workers as much as possible in Nepal. We know that migrants don't always make decisions solely on the basis of money, but it is an important factor that we need to address. Otherwise, private sector is becoming a training institute for Malaysia and Qatar and other countries, and we don't need that. So these are the three priorities that we will be working on to support the implementation of the labor law and social security law. And I say that DFID also is working with ILO, recognizes the importance of addressing these labor-related constraints to growth. Finally, I think while we have, and I have to say, workers' organizations that are so growth-oriented that recognize that you can't have decent jobs unless you have jobs to begin with. And I don't see this in many other countries in Asia, where I spent my adult life in Asia, so I'm impressed by that. We have employers' organizations, CNI and FNCCI, that also see the importance of negotiating fair deals. And the Social Security Act, with a large contribution of employers, is a major give on the part of the employers. But we also need a government system, a Ministry of Labor, that can deliver and manage labor relations at the local level. We're far from this now. So we really need to look at how we can mobilize or capitalize on the decentralization process and work with local governments to extend the arm of the Ministry of Labor to support labor administration, labor inspection, and all the services that are needed to make sure that laws are implemented. So that's my final point today. So thank you Hari, thank you DFID, thank you.
Very good, thank you. So I give this floor now to Mr. Keshav Achara, very senior economist. Sir, please finish your presentation in 5 minutes because you're such an eminent economist, you may take more time.
Go to my observations, my remarks. I was very happy in this morning session to hear this because SAWTEE addresses so many problems. It established within SAWTEE, they are required to export 75% of their product. Company Registrar Office, Department of Industry, because there is one-stop service center. So I think we should put pressure on government to to bring into operation the Bhairava SAWTEE. Only one critical infrastructure is remaining to be completed, that is electricity connection, and work is going on in speed in Simara. So with that much on Simara, on SAWTEE, I will go on the content of our presentation this morning and now. I think while we talk of employment, I think we are taking only paid employment. What is very important in Nepal is self-employment is getting very important here. Unlike in the 70s when we graduated, everybody of us were looking for the job in the government or in the private sector, banks, finance. Now there are thousands and thousands of these college graduates in business and ICT. Not all of them are looking for paid job. They are working as self-employed. So we should also, while making a policy on employment, we should take this into consideration. This is very, very important. And if you see this education, health, this ICT, call centers, all young people, they are going there. So there should be some policy to encourage them. And since employment is a byproduct, an outcome of investment by the private sector, there should be some incentives for the private sector. Like if we have a skill training center for the worker, there should be some kind of business incubation or factory incubation for the entrepreneurs, so that they can go and experiment there and find for themselves where they can contribute the best. I think that is very important. Another, in the paper, we talk about agriculture, light manufacturing, ICT. One thing that is being ignored is, except for very few notorious cooperatives in the urban area, Kathmandu, Pokhara, Biratnagar, cooperative is a booming sector in Nepali economy. There are about 35,000 cooperatives all across the country, and they have been very useful in this micro-enterprise development and in commercializing agriculture. I think we should see what we can do for the cooperative sector so that it can generate productive, decent employment. And while talking about employment, there is a problem in Nepal. We don't have data on employment. Employment by sector, employment by region, employment by type of factories or enterprise, we don't have any data. We get labor force survey every 5 years and census report every 10 years. In the interim, we don't know. So we have Ministry of Labor and Employment, but they are almost all focused on having data on foreign employment rather than here. There is no employment exchange. So that the intervention doesn't become very effective unless we have regular time series data flow on the state of employment. I think that's very important. We need to take care of that. And this morning, the Vice President of FNCCI, Mr. Shekhar Golcha, he was talking about, he was saying that unemployment is about 2%. When people, economists from outside Nepal, they look at it, they will be, very jealous of Nepal's economy. Only 2% unemployment rate. The problem is not unemployment itself. Disguised unemployment. It's very rampant. We have very, very heavy incidents of disguised unemployment all over the agriculture sector and in the informal economic activities, where marginal productivity of labor is almost zero. So while addressing this employment, unemployment issue, I think we should also look into this. How can we address the problem of disguised unemployment so that every worker can contribute to economic growth? And finally, since I don't want to run over time, I want to now complete my observation. One thing we don't know yet, we don't have any study on employment elasticity of investment. Which sector per unit of a rupee will produce more employment? We need a kind of study. Whether it is agriculture, here in Nepal, there are some sectors which are coming up very, very well. This shoes, cement, and pharmaceutical, and poultry, and fishery. I think somebody, either through development partner or through government or some academic institutions or some think tanks, we need to conduct a study. Which are the sectors that generate much more employment per, say, per unit of investment, so that we can design our policy likely. And finally, I agree with Dr. Posh Pandey, who observed this morning that in the utility function of an investor, employment is not a target. For them, efficiency, enhancing efficiency, reducing cost, maximizing profit is the main agency. So there should be a trade-off. Who is going to compensate for the extra effort that private sector has to put on for generating more employment, so that there is a level playing field. With this, I want to stop here.
Thank you.
Thanks, organizer and Mr. Chair, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. Because I'm going to talk a little bit different from what's been said this morning also, and even mentality, let's say, of only collecting. Skilled ones who earn more will send more remittance into the country. But these are also things that we have to think about when we talk about policies. And again, I was recently in the villages where I was giving some training, and the mentality there is like, I was asking them, what's stopping you from becoming an entrepreneur or starting your own business? Because they had enough resources there, there's enough order there, there's enough market. But when I talked with them, they said, it was mainly the men who said, the environment is not there. And I questioned them, what is the environment that's stopping you? And they said, when we start any business, we don't earn immediately. And everybody in the village says, you should have gone abroad, you should have if you had gone, you would have earned more. So this is the environment where even if you want to work, you are not really encouraged to do it. So, and then I asked the ladies, you have enough opportunities, there are thousands of donor agencies who are providing you all trainings, giving you all even funding you all, and yet why aren't you able to fulfill the orders that have been placed to you? And they said, well, in the villages it's a small community, and all the donors require certain numbers that have to be presented, like we have trained 300 people, we have trained 30 people, we have trained so many people. So what happens is, these same people are being dragged into different places, and on top of it they have to look after the old in the family, the young in the family, and they have to even give community service called chhar or something like that, they were saying. And always the trainings that go at the donors' time, which is not their time. They don't want it during festivals, they don't want it during harvesting time. And it's always at that time. So that is, they were saying, so how do we work? So these are some of the mentality. Then again, our education. What do we do with our education? You can see thousands of boards everywhere saying abroad study, abroad study. We have geared our people only to go abroad to study, to get your jobs. We have haven't retained anybody here. We have not talked about creating business here, about starting your enterprise here. That environment has to be there. And yes, we've talked about the educated ones. What about the ones who are school dropouts or who have very little knowledge? They may not have got the education, but they are within the working range, 40, 45, and they don't have education. But we have not targeted those people. So these are also places where they can work. And even the organizations like so many places, when I went, I had heard that there are 70,000, 80,000 women and men who have been trained by MEDEP and MEDPA and all that. But when I really went there to ask whether I could get some of their semi-processed products that I could value add and again market, there were hardly 2 people working. Who monitors them? So if we had 70,000, 80,000 women already or men working, then our country should have been developed by now. Isn't that it? So monitoring part is very weak, and we have to, there are lots of places where the jobs are required. There are, let's say, even for uneducated people, if we can give them, how do we say, respect in any small jobs that they do, give them, send them with some respect, say these people, okay, household work, even an uneducated person can earn from 10,000 to 16,000 to 20,000 because they usually work in 2 to 3 shifts in any house. So they would be earning money, but that respect is not there. So we have to create that respect, that they are not servants, they are helpers. Without them, our life is difficult. So this sort of message has not gone out at all. And even for agriculture, we find that so many people, they have land there. When I met a lady there who had a huge plot of land, and when we said, why don't you do any farming there? She said, I'm already old. And what about your children? Oh, they are all educated and in Kathmandu. So in Kathmandu, what are they doing? Are they in very nice jobs? She said, no, they do, some are office workers who clean up and all that. I said, you are so rich in your own place, and why do you go to Kathmandu to work in such a small thing? So the government also has to start encouraging people to go back to their provinces. Now that we are going to have different provinces, people, especially from the same province, should be working in their own place so that they develop that places. These are things that we have to think of, not just the policies and the, I don't know, the bigger, so encouraging people to go back to their village could be also one of the things. And another is, when we talk about education, they should be like vocational services, but not everybody, especially, let's say, middle-aged people, will not have time to go and take 2 years or 3 years of vocational training. They need short-term trainings too, which has not been so much focused on. And there are many also school dropouts who have been, like, they could go for CTVT, has a lot of training, but they are geared more towards like an 8-month training, 10 months training, and many of the women said they could not attend because they have small children at home. So how do we tackle all this? I think when we make policies, when we make programs, these are also components that we have to look into. These are the reality that's in the field. Let's not just talk about people who are educated, who mostly we are targeted, they will either find jobs here, if not, because our education system is such, they will be going abroad. That's how the reality is here. So if we target people who are more, who will stay here because they have small children, they cannot leave, or they have families here, they cannot leave. Let's start targeting those people too. They may not have the education, +2 education, or may not be IT savvy or things like that, but we can teach them. So these are some of the points I think that should be considered when we talk about job creation. So with this, I think I can end my...
Thank you, Madam. Thank you. Only one lady speaker from the company with us. Our experiences, they are equally good, very sincere, very hardworking.
In tourism is very, very strong. 3-hour location, because in China and India, China is going to produce 1.5 million outbound, and India is going to produce 1 million outbound travelers by 2020. So that's the market. And our link with the value-based traditional market with Europe and US. Basically, the nature of tourism is also very, very important for sustainable development. It is very environment-friendly business. Other industries sometimes dislocate communities, but it is the only business which interlinks with the communities. In low investment, we can get more return in tourism. We have seen some of the experiences. And in other many industries, it is always or mostly investors-led business, but sometimes in tourism, it is community-led business also in that perspective. And one very unique thing about Nepal's tourism and other tourism also is in other business, products are exported to the customers, but in tourism, customers are brought to the product or destinations. So these are a few very special things about tourism. One very unique thing we have observed in Nepal's tourism is mostly the unskilled and semi-skilled laborers, for example, porters, trekking guides, they have turned into entrepreneur in a very quick span of time in Nepal's tourism. For example, if one guy from a rural village enters into tourism as a porter, in 2 or 3 or 4 years of time, he becomes entrepreneur. So that kind of thing, I think this is one of the area where we need to study more. As presenter mentioned, 2 major limitations or challenges in our tourism, infrastructure and better communication or promotion. Yes, that is. I also agree with that. And I would like to add 3 points more. One, investment. When you talk about investment in tourism, it is mostly 90% plus is in hotel only, but we need more investment in infrastructure and activity creation. Other thing is quality human resource, and third is technical know-how. Because of poor technical knowledge, we are not being strong to have our presence in digital world. For example, in TripAdvisor, in other sites. That is there. And when we talk about job market, UNWTO says that one tourist creates job opportunities for 11 people. In Nepal, around 400,000 people are directly employed in tourism. I think if we can manage 3-4 things, we can create very good job opportunities. For example, in most of the cases, we have job there, but we don't have technical or skilled manpower that can reap that benefit from that job market. Second, we have skill sometimes, but that is not linked to the market. For example, we call tourism as a hospitality business. Mostly when we see in our houses, most of the hospitality management thing like cooking, housekeeping, these all things are done by our mothers or our sisters, but they are hardly linked with the tourism industry. When in tourism industry, most of the cooks are male. So that kind of mismatch is also there. If we can link that, that can create another opportunities. And tourism is the sector where we need innovation and creativity. That also we lack, and because of that, we have not been able to create more job opportunities. And third thing, I think we need to glamorize the sector where we want to attract labor. For example, going out has become a kind of glam factor, so that people are going despite there are many opportunities inside the country. For example, there is a big scarcity of human resource serving Chinese tourists, Chinese-speaking guides, but people are queuing for Korean languages to go to Korea. So these kind of things are there. If we can work in this kind of sectors, there is a huge opportunity in our tourism job market. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joshi.
Employment, like Yasabji mentioned about, all government statistics shows that 62% or more than 60% of the total employable people in the country is based on agriculture. That is all this guy's employment, I would rather say. The people who are not involved in the formal job that are considered, they must be in agriculture. This is a data constraint, so we don't know how many people are actually involved in agriculture. Like our senior vice president talk about 4% only. The labor force of the country are involved in the organized sector. 96% are not in the disorganized sector. So this may also prove that this guy involved employment there in agriculture. And let's see the comparison of their productivity and contributions to the national economy. That is GDP less than 35%. That shows, I'm relating that to the study made by the study team. So the productivity of labor force in agriculture is very low. While you compare 62% and 30% and landholding size and production, so that signifies the productivity low, because the database on the employment creation in agriculture is very much missing, and we can definitely say how many people are involved in agriculture. That has been misleading to the country strategy for the agriculture growth in Nepal. That has to be, I would rather, would be better to say why there was a vice president of NPC in this morning. So let's think about that statistics. And also, I did a small study for the agricultural employment in the rice sector that I found only about 90,000 people in the country are involved in the formal sector as industry level, managers, whatever. So among those less than 100,000 people, full-time employment is around 45 to 50,000. So this is based on my their survey, not I've gone to the field and checked all the things, because most of the rice mills, big rice mills are already registered with the government and smalls are not. So this is the scenario of that. Now I'll go directly to the recommendation and findings of the study. The agriculture, there are lots of opportunity in agriculture. Why we are very much behind in agriculture? The reasons behind there, which has been missed by the study team, is policy. We are very rich in policy. The implementation part, most of the people in this room agrees, we are very, very weak. Maybe less than 20% of the policies that have been implemented so far. If you talk about policy, we have many policies. Agribusiness promotion policy, Nepal agricultural policy, Nepal forestry policy, Nepal investment policy, foreign fiscal policy, many more. In many cases, as I did some study on the policy matter, those policies does not coincide or does not have a good relation with other policies, which make those policies to be implemented independently or in collaboration with other policies made by the government of Nepal. That has to be also, would be better if you put in your recommendation part. The next one, as former speakers talk about that, agriculture is less lucrative and less socially acceptable job in Nepal. People, as Rita Madam said, in the villages, they sit up with the women there. Why don't you start your own business? This is not the lucrative job and not the very socially respected job. Where you go to Kathmandu and go abroad for any household course or household jobs, then you get money, and this is, you get at least the reputation in the village. She is back from Arab, Kuwait, whatever from the countries abroad. So it has, in your recommendation part, you talk about lack of job demand, gap in knowledge about job. Also put educated people about the job demand, and also educate them. What if they go in Kathmandu or in their own country, the benefit they can get from their own job, like Madam has spell out about some small entrepreneurs, enterprises which can be created in the village, and there is a big demand for those products made by them. This is one part also missing by the government's strategy, and also the agriculture has to be considered as a very respected job, like in India. Also, they have put, they have a slogan, Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan. That means, their glorified job is agriculture. So in Nepal, if you talk about agriculture, you show the photograph of a small poor farmer wearing a tear-ups, shurwal, kameez, and blowing with the spade, not even with the hollow like that. That signifies the small kids who are studying in school, what impression does to them. When you talk about Kisan, farmer, see the poor fellow. Farmers are poor. They are not respected people. So the impression goes like that. To better educate from the high school level or maybe whatever, and also the social stigma here. In country like Nepal, we do not want to do any manual job in country. Most of the people are very much crazy to go for the white collar job. And while they go abroad, they do most nasty jobs which are easily available there. So the stigma is, if I go back to my home, if I sell vegetable in the market, my fellow will say, oh, this man can do nothing selling vegetable, where they can earn a lot. This part of education part is also very much missing. And also in your study, you talk about the job creation possibility, and Nepal can benefit from those. Inclusivity is another challenge for the developing countries like Nepal. What type of job can be created for a special group of people, Dalit, Janjati, women, whatever we call social categories. And also, I don't think in your report I saw the inflow and outflow of our labor force. How many people in the construction job? We have many people coming from India, and also most of our people, as former speakers already said, that unskilled people goes abroad for the same type of job, and we are paying more than double what they are getting in those abroad jobs. So that part of statistics or maybe some recommendation on that is also missing. Also, I just want to conclude that let the government implement the policy for agricultural development in at least at par of neighboring country India. In India, agriculture is heavily subsidized in every aspect. While you compare the subsidy to Nepal, it is about 30% of India subsidy that has been provided to farmers. While I talk with the Indian farmers, they ask the price of urea, the fertilizer, chemical fertilizer. I said it's 32 rupees, 35 rupees. And he was surprised. I asked, still the Nepali farmers are surviving? How they can survive? We are in 20 rupees Indian currency per kg of urea. Oh, impossible. In India, they are getting at 7 rupees at that time. I don't know the present price. So this is what the subsidy. And we have more than 1,000 kilometers open border with India. So everything comes and goes, and we are losing our comparative advantage and competitive advantage because of lack of subsidy and implementation of those very nice policy for agricultural development. And cost of agriculture is getting more high because of the capital cost. The government has already introduced subsidy on the loan, but still it is not very much practiced in the actual agriculture development because of there are some other concerns, like the bankers want to go for the urban sector as taking collateral against their loan, and agriculture people don't have much more access to the land in urban sector, and the village rural sector land is very much low, at the lowest possible valuation, and they will get small amount of loan which is not good for their growing new business. So these policies shall be implemented in collaboration with other policies, fiscal policy of Nepal, which also indicates the income tax and VAT. So everything that has to be, I think, would be better if you come into your recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Prabhu.
It's a cascading, cutting agenda. So in my opinion, let me go to the very real fact. So whenever we talk about the employment regarding ICT in Nepal, we do not have any survey of ICT till now. Maybe of some feasibility or some workforce or anything that matters. So my first agenda is, first of all, we should have the survey of the human resources regarding ICT. So every year there are 4,000 to 5,000 graduates. It's coming every year. So where they will go? There's no data at all. So we need to identify first. Then only we can think of this employment issues and all these things. That is my first agenda. And another important thing is, there is a big gap between the industry and academia regarding the ICT. And actually industry are not getting the qualified people in the sector of ICT to engage them. So what is the problem? We need to identify that. So my opinion is, we should have some, finishing school or some, something before they graduate. Because, ICT, there are many sectors. Software, hardware, networking, there are many things. So they might have some graduate degree, and then after that, maybe 6 months or so, they can expertise in some area so that they can really get the job. So this is one thing we need to address, and we are generally, discussing these things from many years, but nothing is happening till now. And another thing is, this ICT is the knowledge-based industry actually. If you have the laptops, anything, you can design many things, and you can be an entrepreneur. That is always there. So a simple example, you might have heard about Uber all around the world. But now Nepalese entrepreneur has already invented SAWTEE, the same as Uber in Nepal also. See, these are the things happening in Nepal. And another important thing is, there are many companies in Nepal which are not registered to government and doing the outsourcing job. Can you identify that? No one cares that. I can name few companies like Pierwa, Cloud Factory and all these which are registered here and doing the business here. So what about all others? See, these are all free. We have the strength, but we don't have anything in line, no survey, nothing. And another important thing is, there is no priority. ICT is not priority list in the government. I mentioned this in the early session also. So this is one of the important hurdles we have. And another important thing is, now we need to brand our country as an ICT hub in the world. This is a beautiful country and many people interested to come here and work here. Just take the example of Bangladesh. They have the jargon as digital Bangladesh. And they have given the different tax holiday and all facilities to the different countries. I mean, the people wanted to come to Bangladesh and work. Now, most of the multinational company has established their office in Bangladesh. See, job opportunities created now. So what about Nepal? Why don't you think on that perspective? Rather than going to Bangladesh, people will come to Nepal. Amazing. So this is one important point I think government has to note down. And we have a very, very opportunity. Now we are talking about e-governance. Now if really government want to implement e-governance, can you think of the employment? How much government will intake the ICT, the people with taking the ICT sector? So this is the amazing things, So I'm saying all these things actually, and this is the real status actually. So I don't have much things to share with you all. So I have seen the potential of ICT. So I'm loving this. I think since 20 years I'm saying the same thing. And some good signals are coming because now we have the optical fiber link to, they have already started the connectivity issue. That is one of the best issue, major issue to address ICT. And there was a power issues. Now it is solved little bit, not much. So we are there now. So I think if we can really prioritize this ICT, even if you talk about tourism, it is based on actually we talk about e-tourism nowadays. People can Google it and then they can see everything from internet and they can come visit to Nepal. So how can we do all those things, So there are many things to talk about in ICT. Since I have a very limited time, so I don't like to take much of your time. So my final version is, let us prioritize ICT. As India has developed in ICT, we can do the same thing. Thank you very much.
सबैभन्दा पहिला यो जुन हाम्रो रोजगार प्रवर्धन गर्ने, रोजगारी बढाउने, कसरी रोजगारलाई मर्यादित गर्ने भन्ने सन्दर्भ छ। यो हाम्रो लागि मलाई लाग्छ धेरै ठुलो चुनौतीको विषय हो, धेरै महत्त्वपूर्ण विषय हो, किनभने नेपालमा अहिले हामीहरू एउटा चेन्जिङ कन्टेक्स्टमा छौँ। नेपाल चाहिँ एउटा स्ट्रक्चरल चेन्जमा पनि गइरहेको छ। त्यसपछि चाहिँ अहिले श्रम ऐन, यो सामाजिक सुरक्षा ऐनहरू भर्खरै आइसकेर एउटा लामो समयको इम्प्लोयर र वर्करको बिचको एउटा डिबेट, श्रम विवाद समाधान गर्ने विषयहरूमा चाहिँ मलाई लाग्छ एउटा नयाँ परिस्थिति चाहिँ हामीले डेभलप गरेका छौँ। त्यस कारणले मलाई लाग्छ यो खुसीको अवस्थामा यो मिटिङहरू हुन गइरहेको छ। मलाई लाग्छ यहाँ चाहिँ के छ भने हामीसँग इम्प्लोयरसँग हाम्रो धेरै कुराहरूमा विमति हुन्छ, गभर्मेन्टसँग रिजर्भेसन हुन्छ वर्करको इस्युहरूमा। तर अहिले हामीहरू सहमतिको आधार तिनै पक्षको वर्कर्स, इम्प्लोयर र गभर्मेन्टको तिनै पक्षको सहमतिबाट अहिले भर्खरै हामीले एउटा लामो डिबेट छलफल पछि हामीहरू सहमतिबाट चाहिँ नयाँ चाहिँ लेबर ल हामीले चाहिँ आएको छ। त्यसै गरी सामाजिक सुरक्षा भनेर कन्ट्रिब्युटरी सोसियल सेक्युरिटी एक्ट भनेका छौँ। त्यसमा चाहिँ योगदानमा आधारित सबै पक्षको, त्यसमा चाहिँ मलाई लाग्छ त्यो कामसँग सम्बन्धित भएर त्यो चाहिँ जसले योगदान गर्छ, त्यसमा जसले काम गरेर आफ्नो चाहिँ कन्ट्रिब्युसनहरू त्यहाँ गर्छ, जम्मा गर्छ, त्यो सबैलाई चाहिँ लागू हुने भनेर अनौपचारिक क्षेत्रलाई बेसी गरी फोकस गरेर। किन हाम्रो देशमा चाहिँ ठुलो चाहिँ अनौपचारिक क्षेत्र छ कि अहिले तपाईँले सबैले सुन्नुभयो 90% भन्दा बढी चाहिँ अनौपचारिक चाहिँ वर्करहरू छन् र तिनीहरूलाई पनि कभर गर्ने गरी पहिला हाम्रो के थियो भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ यो लेबर लमा पनि के थियो भने 10 भन्दा माथि काम गर्ने ठाउँ मात्रै लेबर ल लाग्ने, त्यहाँ मात्रै चाहिँ थाई गर्ने र थाई श्रमिकहरूले मात्रै सामाजिक सुरक्षाहरू, औषधि उपचारका कुराहरू, अरू बेनिफिट पाउने कुराहरू थियो भने अहिलेको चाहिँ लेबर ल हामीले सबैको सहमतिमा चाहिँ इम्प्लोयरले पनि एग्री गरेर चाहिँ के छ भन्दाखेरि हामीले त्यहाँ थाई हुने 240 दिनको कुरा भन्दा पनि डे 1 देखि नै, पहिलो दिनदेखि नै जुन काममा जाने श्रमिकहरूले पहिलो दिनदेखि नै उसको सामाजिक सुरक्षा र स्वास्थ्य सम्बन्धी सबै कन्डिसनहरू चाहिँ लागू हुनुपर्छ भन्ने मान्यताबाट नयाँ ऐन चाहिँ आएको छ। जसले गर्दा के छ भन्दा देशमा चाहिँ इम्प्लोइमेन्ट चाहिँ जेनेरेट हुनको लागि एउटा फाइदा छ र नयाँ कामहरू सुरुवात हुने अवस्थाहरू आएको छ। यसमा हामीले के छ भन्दाखेरि सबै हामी चाहिँ एउटा खुसी, एउटा ठिक ढङ्गले हामी गइरहेका छौँ भन्ने हामीलाई लागिरहेको छ। तर हाम्रो चुनौती कहाँ छ त भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ त्यो ऐनहरू इम्प्लिमेन्ट गर्नको लागि चाहिँ के छ भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ श्रम विवादहरू चाहिँ पहिला हामीले फर्मल सेक्टरमा मात्रै हाम्रो त्यो लागू हुन्थ्यो भने अहिले अनौपचारिक क्षेत्रमा एउटा ताप्लेजुङदेखि लिएर पश्चिमको चाहिँ तपाईँ कञ्चनपुरसम्म जहाँ पनि अनौपचारिक कृषिमा काम गर्ने होस्, निर्माणमा काम गर्ने होस् या अरू कुनै पनि व्यवसायमा के अरे पेसामा काम गर्ने श्रमिकहरूको त्यसले ज्याला पायो कि पाएन त, त्यसले सामाजिक सुरक्षाको चाहिँ सुविधाहरू पायो कि पाएन त भनेर हेर्ने मेकानिजमहरू, त्यसलाई मोनिटर गर्ने कुराहरू चाहिँ त्यो चाहिँ कमी छ। पहिलाको समय पनि लागू हुन सकेको थिएन, झन्डै 25-20% मात्रै लागू भएको होला, अरू चाहिँ लागू हुन सकेको थिएन। त्यो चाहिँ हाम्रो चाहिँ केही सर्टेन एरियामा फर्मलमा मात्रै लागू हुँदा पनि अहिले अनौपचारिक क्षेत्रमा लागू हुनको लागि चाहिँ गभर्मेन्टको चाहिँ के छ भन्दा क्यापेसिटी चाहिँ बढाउनु पर्ने अवस्थाहरू छ। त्यहाँ चाहिँ श्रम इन्सपेक्सन सिस्टमहरू चाहिँ भयो कि भएन, त्यहाँ चाहिँ उसले ज्याला पाएको छ कि छैन त, त्यहाँ सामाजिक सुरक्षामा आउन सक्यो कि सकेन त भन्ने कुराहरूको हेर्नको लागि, मोनिटर गर्नको लागि चाहिँ गभर्मेन्टको चाहिँ मेकानिजमहरू चाहिँ बढ्नुपर्ने छ। सँगसँगै हाम्रो क्यापेसिटी, ट्रेडको क्यापेसिटी के भन्दाखेरि श्रमिकहरूलाई जो अनौपचारिक क्षेत्रमा छन् उनीहरूलाई तिमीहरू लागि यो कुराहरू छ है ऐनहरूमा, तिमीहरूले डे 1 देखि नै सामाजिक सुरक्षाको चाहिँ कुराहरू पाउँछौ, व्यवस्थापनहरू छ भनेर उनीहरूलाई चाहिँ अवेर गर्ने, उनीहरूलाई जानकारी गराउनको लागि पनि ट्रेडहरू पनि अब त्यसको शिक्षाहरू या गभर्मेन्टको तर्फबाट त्यसलाई एजुकेट गर्नुपर्ने अवस्थाहरू छ। त्यस कारणले अहिले हाम्रो चाहिँ चुनौती के छ भन्दाखेरि त्यो ऐनहरू जुन आएको छ त्यसलाई लागू गर्यो भनेपछि एकातिर इम्प्लोयरलाई पनि के छ भन्दा नयाँ जबहरू चाहिँ क्रिएसन गर्न सजिलो छ भने अर्कोतिर श्रमिक पनि के छ भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ आफ्नो चाहिँ रोजगारीमा जाँदाखेरि चाहिँ एउटा चाहिँ मर्यादित हुन सक्ने डिसेन्ट वर्कको कुराहरूमा उसले चाहिँ पाउने सुविधाहरू सामान्य सुरक्षाहरू चाहिँ लागू हुन सक्ने कुराहरू भइरहेको छ। हामीले के छ भन्दाखेरि काम चाहिँ छौँ, हाम्रो अहिले के छ भन्दाखेरि एकदमै वेज चाहिँ कम छ। तपाईँलाई थाहा होला 9,700 रुपियाँ अहिले चाहिँ मजदुरले पाउँछ। मिनिमम वेज भनेको त्यो फिक्स भएको, त्यो 9,700 तपाईँ कल्पना गर्नुहोस्, कुनै पनि यो देशको कुनै पनि ठाउँमा बस्ने मजदुरले उसको पुरा आफ्नो परिवार पाल्न सक्छ। त्यति मिनिमम वेजेस छ र त्यो पनि लागू हुन सकेको अवस्थाहरू छैन सबै ठाउँमा। त्यस कारणले हाम्रो समस्या के भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ जब हामी जबको कुरा गर्छौँ भने जब चाहिँ डिसेन्ट हुनु पऱ्यो, लिभिङ वेजेसहरू पाउनु पऱ्यो, त्यो मर्यादित हुनु पऱ्यो। फेरि अर्कोतिर के छ भने साथीले पूर्वका साथीले भन्नुभयो मर्यादित जब चाहिँ के छ भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ हाम्रो के छ भने कामलाई हामीले एक त हामीले त्यसको सामान्य सुरक्षाहरू पाउनु पऱ्यो, त्यसको चाहिँ डिग्निटीहरू हुनु पऱ्यो, त्यो किसिमको एउटा मर्यादित छैन। अर्को समाजले हेर्ने के छ भन्दाखेरि काम गर्ने मान्छे चाहिँ सरकारमा काम गर्छ या शिक्षक पढाउँछ या सरकार छ भने त्यो चाहिँ मर्यादित जस्तो देखिन्छ, उसलाई समाजले हेर्ने ए राम्रो काम गरिरहेछ भन्ने हुन्छ। तर एउटा साग बेचिरहेको छ, इन्कम त हिसाबले त राम्रो होला, तर त्यसलाई राम्रो ढङ्गले समाजले हेर्दैन। त्यस कारणले हाम्रो एटिच्युडहरू पनि के छ भने बदल्नु पर्नेछ कि जुनसुकै काम पनि सम्मानित हो, जुनसुकै श्रम पनि मर्यादित हो, त्यो हिसाबले हामीले हेर्न सक्ने चाहिँ एउटा सोसाइटीलाई पनि हामीले चेन्ज गर्ने, गभर्मेन्टको चाहिँ पर्सपेक्टिभ पनि चेन्ज हुने किसिमको भयो भने मलाई लाग्छ रोजगारी भनेको यही छ। रोजगारी चाहिँ धेरै टाढा जानुपर्ने अवस्थाहरू हामी देखिरहेको छैन, तर यहाँ हुनसक्छ। तर अहिले किन मान्छे त्यहाँ बस्दैन, किन अरब गइरहेको छ? 15,000 त खान्छ अरबमा गएर, मलेसियामा 15-20,000 खान्छ। तर यहाँ पनि ठुलो कुरा छैन नि, हामी 9,700 त्यहाँ छ भने हामीले 5,000 बढायो भने 15,000 त हाम्रो पुग्छ नि त। तर हामी त्यो 15,000 एकातिर बढाउन पनि सकिरहेको छैनौँ। अर्को त्यो 15,000 खाने मान्छेले आफ्नो ढुक्कसँगले म यो देशको नागरिक हुँ, म यहाँ काम गरिरहेको छु, मैले गरेको श्रमले देश चलिरहेको छ भन्ने किसिमको एउटा फिलिङ पनि गर्न सकिरहेको छैन। त्यस कारणले हामीले के छ भन्दा अहिले चाहिँ जुन चेन्जिङ कन्टेक्स्टमा अब हामीले यो किसिमको सोचाइहरू, यो किसिमको भनाइहरू, यो किसिमको चाहिँ दृष्टिकोणहरू हामीले अगाडि सार्न सक्यौँ भने मलाई लाग्छ यहाँका युवाहरू जति बाहिर गएका छन् यहाँ फर्काउनको लागि हामीले चाहिँ यहाँ हामीले कोसिस गर्नुपर्छ। अहिले भूकम्प गएको बेलामा हामीले धेरै कोसिस गऱ्यौँ, भूकम्प गएको ठाउँमा घर बनाएको छैन, तपाईँले सुन्नुभयो धेरै कम छ, किनभने त्यहाँ लेबर चाहिँ उ छ, क्राइसिस छ, डिफिसिट छ, मान्छेहरू काम गर्न पाइरहेको छ, यहाँ छैनन्, बाहिर छन्। अब इन्डस्ट्रीमा पनि हामी सुन्छौँ अब अहिले हाम्रो चाहिँ सिएनआईको अध्यक्ष यहाँ हुनुहुन्छ, कति ठाउँमा मजदुरहरू चाहिँ स्किलमा मजदुरहरू छैन, बाहिर गइरहेको छ। त्यस कारणले हामीले के छ भन्दाखेरि तिनीहरूलाई यहाँ बस्नको लागि चाहिँ वातावरण बनाउनको लागि सबभन्दा पहिला त त्यो लेबरको डिग्निटीलाई हामीले हेर्नु पऱ्यो, मिनिमम वेजेस अगाडि बढाउनु पऱ्यो, लिभिङ वेजेसमा लानु पऱ्यो। त्यस कारणले चाहिँ यो कुराहरू हामीले गर्न सक्छौँ। र अहिले केही गभर्मेन्टका जस्तो अहिले गाउँमा त कृषिको कुराहरू तपाईँले देख्नु भएको छ, हाम्रो प्रोडक्सन सर्टै घटेर गएको छ। अहिले हामी चाहिँ इम्प्लोयर्ससँग लागु गर्न खोजिरहेको। त्यस कारणले मलाई लाग्छ म तपाईँहरूलाई म यो जुन कार्यक्रम छ यसमा कति गभर्मेन्ट पोस्टमा हामी जाँदाखेरि चाहिँ हाम्रो प्रतिबद्धता के छ भने जसरी जब चाहिँ बढाउनको लागि, मर्यादित बनाउनको लागि र अगाडि जानको लागि देशलाई चाहिँ विकासको अगाडि फरवार्ड गर्नको लागि चाहिँ ट्रेनहरू चाहिँ बाधक हुँदैन, ट्रेनहरू चाहिँ ढङ्गले जान्छन्। तर हामी यति भन्छौँ कि मिनिमम वर्किङ कन्डिसनहरू, आइएलओका कोर लेबर कन्भेन्सनहरूको आधारमा त्यो चाहिँ हामीले लागू हुनुपर्छ, जसले गर्दा मजदुरको जीवन मर्यादित हुन्छ, सुरक्षित हुन्छ भन्ने कुराहरू म राख्दै मेरो भनाइ अन्त गर्न चाहन्छु। धन्यवाद।
In the country, they have seen into effective implementation by the government. They manage, some of them are even not legal entities, but they are employing people, they are giving opportunities to work at the unorganized sector. Then he had also of the opinion that the type of minimum wages given in Nepal strikes in which they passed, which is a very good sign. And go to the government, to the employers for common cause, common issues, are in favor of making very conducive labor conditions in low-graded, low-income jobs, because they are not getting as max. The trade unions and jointly they are very willing to support to the industries to make environment more conducive in the country. Thank you, Mr. Small ideas what he had explored and he had said. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to an end of the presentation and comments by the experts. As you know, they represent not one of this country. What I have seen is in Nepal, we talk too much about the problems implemented in this country in the short run and what solutions could be implemented in the long run. These are the things that we need to debate in future. Many of the challenges we already know. To our industries, they don't have, I mean, they come to an industry where more than 300, 400, 500 people work. And then you have to understand how to behave with that 400 people mass. It's not easy that you come immediately from. We do not import too many things in our open economic policy system, which is only open for import. Some of you have indicated that we have a regulation problem for importing things. I tell you, in whole 112 countries, Nepal is the only country where you can import everything, but it is very difficult to produce. I can import red label whiskey from Scotland, but I cannot produce similar whiskey in this country. I can import pharmaceutical product from India, China, or Switzerland, or Germany, but I cannot produce same thing in this country. Production is controlled because that is the type of regulation in this country. That is where the policy reversal is required if we could do that. I do not have any doubt this economy will expand, industries will grow, and I would also tell my colleague from the tourism department, many people have a very short-term thinking in our economy. If he is from tourism, he says that tourism can transform this country. If I am from pharmaceutical, I can say that pharmaceutical market is such huge that pharmaceutical can transform our economy. If you are from ICT, you say ICT can transform. When I hear from hydropower producers, they say it is only the hydropower that will transform it in this economy. But the fact is, we need to invest everywhere. We need hydropower, we need tourism, we need manufacturing sector, we need good agriculture. The only problem this country is having in agriculture is the land ownership. Unless you don't change land ownership pattern, this economy in agri can never compete with many other countries. Because in India you can have your own land where you can do mechanization. Here you cannot do mechanization. There's no economic viability of that. So these are some of the policy gaps for which we would like to work. With these words, I would like to conclude and complete our presentation and open discussion for question and answers.
Points of action in this in the slide. So, I'm sorry to say, but I haven't been able to make really concrete sense out of it. This action point looks really simple to me, and if this could help us to do the economic transformation, when we are talking that we are not shifting from agriculture to manufacturing sector, then if this could help us, then probably our Nepal could have been Singapore when Krishna Prasad Bhattacharya was still alive. But anyway, that was so something is missing in the slides probably, that if we really think our economic transformation requires...
Would you be specific on your question?
My question is,
yes.
Will it solve the problem? I want from the presenter, maybe for me something is missing here. That's what I feel.
So you have
for the economic transformation. Yeah, if these are the action points that we are suggesting for economic transformation, I feel that something is missing there. And then the other point, the other point I wanted to raise is on job skill training. We always, whenever we talk about jobs, we talk about skill. And I don't think that is a big issue, skill training for job creation. Like firms are telling that there is a skill mismatch. I agree with that. But then, even if now the firms are providing the training,
I encourage you not to make statements. Please ask your questions.
Okay,
I will ask the presentators to answer that particular questions he was asking. Do you have any other questions?
Skill will help us transform the economy, to get the economic transformation. I just wanted to explain.
So who would like to answer from the presenters? We have two.
We didn't focus on one particular thing. So how do you move from agriculture to, which was not our focus for this project. So I think maybe that's why you have that feeling there. But how will the skills gap help economic transformation? I think that's what was one of the questions we were trying to understand, is like, are skills necessary to transform, or are there other issues at play that are important and then skills come in? And we found out that there are quite a lot of other issues that you need to take into account. The skills are important, but they come into play when the environment to take advantage of them is in place. So that's the first thing, that's the priority, I think. Sonia?
It is based on the platform economy, as mentioned by the Vinod, because just like we have the SAWTEE here now, and all the new business and industries are coming based on the platforms. And again, if we are talking about new employment, new jobs, then people are working for not only permanent jobs, they are going for different kinds of jobs. Gig economic is coming up. The one job is not sufficient for him or her. So now in this context, when you talk about the knowledge gaps and the skills gaps, I would like to focus on solutions rather than the questions, as you mentioned. This is because particularly we don't have occupational standards adopted by the industries and adopted by the academia. It should be the same. And we don't have the clear occupational levels that we have to discuss when we talk about job creations, right? So let's talk more on the job occupational standards and occupational labels which are adopted by the industries and business, and at the same time the learners or who are having new skills, getting the new skills in the training institutions. That might be the solutions for the future perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you for needs practical unifying, and the Planning Commission, for example, this morning said that they are working on a vision. Maybe that's something where we all can contribute to. In terms of then practical actions, so if you take, for example, the first line, that there is a constraint around energy in manufacturing in southern Nepal, for example, around the...
Well, because we have one more gentleman to speak, is Stan Spencer from DFID. I don't see any hands being raised, so I thank you.
Noted down who, for each one, who can be responsible for actually sort of taking it forwards. That I'm aware of. I mean, I may have other suggestions, and I hope that ODI can take note of this list. So as part of their kind of closing this project, they can, together with their own kind of responses from the discussion, they can include this list, so we have it for future reference. So first of all, then, under the research pilot testing, 3 actions, I think. First of all is to research then why people are migrating when there are jobs in Nepal, or even when they already have a good job, like we're saying in ICT, some other sectors, tourism, people are in jobs, they've been trained for a few years, and then they're going overseas. Sorry, not this time, I have a phone call, now, the ILO, you said you want to look into wages, whether the wages aren't high enough to attract people. But I mean, I think as Mr. Sharma said, how does that make sense? Because firms are rational. If they're losing people because their wages are too low, then they'll raise the wages. So I think it needs a more in-depth study on this. And I hope maybe your terms of reference for your study can be included to include this. To look beyond the wages. So, I mean, as an economist, I treat people as rational and think, well, why are they rationally deciding to go overseas? I was talking to Dr. Gurung before this about this very question, and he said one factor is there's more certainty about income overseas, because when you go overseas, you have a 2-year contract and you're certain to get the income from it, whereas often jobs here, you might not have that certainty. So the wages may be the same overseas, but you have the certainty. But then I was really struck, another sort of rational factor might be about information. People see those around them going overseas, getting jobs. That seems to have more information about that than perhaps jobs in Nepal. So those are 2 rational reasons, if you like. But then, that I as an economist would be drawn to. But I was struck that virtually every panel member mentioned culture, right? Rita, you mentioned about lack of respect for domestic workers. Mr. Joshi, you mentioned about the need to glamorise more working in the tourism industry. On agriculture, exactly the same thing. I've heard about this sort of fact that people are, there's a lack of sort of a bit of stigma around manual labour and things. So I think there is a need just to look at this cultural factor. I know it may be difficult to kind of pin down, but we can, with appropriate kind of researchers, we can try and look into it. I know it's hard to address and change, but I think all of you have mentioned it. I think it should be looked at. So that's about why people are going overseas. Research on that. Secondly, then, given the high labour turnover, how can we incentivise firms to be still providing training for their workers? Because when you train someone up, you're going to lose them. Now, one option, and this is where you need to pilot test sort of solutions.
One solution, the traditional solution is, well, then you need government to provide the training. But then there's a massive risk, we know, that the training will be poor quality and not relevant, right? So what I think, what we're interested in, I think, as an idea, is helping industry associations to be collecting fees from their members and organising the training at an industry level, because they can make sure that there's the quality. And that's something we're very keen to support in our new skills programme, which funded this study. And so if you're interested, if an industry association or indeed a firm are interested in exploring this model, then please come and speak to me and my colleagues afterwards. Third action then is the labour force survey. So I think many of you have mentioned about the lack of data. So I know, ILO, you're working with CBS on the next survey. So I appreciate plans may be already finalised for it, but there were suggestions for improvements that could be made to it, to collect data on skills if possible, and on vulnerable groups, on ICT. So, let's talk more afterwards, or you can respond now if there's time, on the potential to do that. If not, as part of our new skills programme, we want to be doing quite in-depth surveys on skill gaps in these key sectors, in these 4 sectors. So that could also be an opportunity to mop up any things that can't be covered by the labour force survey. So those are some key points on research and pilot testing. Oh, sorry, and then also finally, I think my answer to, is it Nita? Nita, your question, is for me, the key missing thing is political economy analysis on growth of these sectors. Why is it that manufacturing exports isn't really taking off? And I mean, one thing that I've heard about political economy of sectors is currently the big business houses of Nepal, it seems to me, I'm not an expert, Mr. Sharma, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're quite focused on selling to the domestic market. And one thing I've heard on political economy around exports, around why exports, some countries' exports really take off, is if the business elites in the country need exports as a source of foreign exchange to be able to import. But here there's not that need because remittances have been bringing in all the foreign exchange we need to import. So there hasn't been, the domestic businesses selling to the local market have got all the money coming in with remittances, that's giving them the foreign exchange also to import in. There's not the need for exports. And so the political economy for exporting isn't suitable here. So there's things like that, if that was in place or could be altered somehow, then these sectors would really take off. So I think that may be worth looking into more political economy about exports in particular. So next then, actions for government. We've got implementing the labour law and the social security law, which needs to take into account the points that Richard made. And so that's the Ministry of Labour and Employment, with the support of the unions and the private sector associations. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is about the foreign exchange restrictions to import and export, which seems to be particularly an issue for ICT. Now, that was an issue, I guess, NRB are responsible for that, but they're not in the room today. And so I would ask if the Economic Policy Incubator Programme, EPI, that Keshav is from, could take that forward, because they're focusing on ICT at the moment. And Keshav, we know you have good links with NRB. That could be for you to move forwards. The third point is, I guess the biggest, is about the infrastructure. We all know that's a problem. I think we all have different programs working on that, so I won't go into detail on it. So that's from the government side. And then finally then, government, academia, industry, is this point about the on-the-job training, right? Whether it is part of a sort of placement scheme as part of a course, an academic course or vocational training, or as a separate scheme where there's a sort of subsidy to the firm to take on someone and train them and etc. There are different ways of doing it. Now I know that the SDC, the Swiss and CTVT are doing piloting now on the job training, I think they're the main one doing this in Nepal that I'm aware of at scale. But I think they're facing problems. They did surveys of firms in different sectors saying, would you be willing to support, contribute towards on-the-job training and share the cost? But they're finding in practice firms aren't willing to be putting up the money. So, I mean, I think there are issues in practice and we need to be tweaked to try different ways of doing it. And so with our new programme, we want to do very in-depth randomised control trials on these different kinds of interventions, seeing actually what's the best way to do it. Because you need very in-depth, studies on these things. And so we welcome then support from industry associations, again, in how to do this on-the-job training and do it in an effective way that can share out all the costs. So thank you very much, and for your contributions. And that's all.
Spencer, now it's my turn to conclude everything. Why Nepal's economy has not been able to create more jobs? I think it is policy regulations. Most of our regulations are very, very old. Some of them are made when I was even not born. So you can imagine those were the time when Nepal did not have any businesses, nor there was any idea to have business of today's size or today's nature. So we need to change all that. There are about 35X regulations which needs to be changed if we want industries to grow in this country. This is the only country in South Asia which have policies like controlling exports. There are separate regulations, there are separate acts which says that you need to control exports. Every country is promoting export, this country is controlling exports. So there are too many mismatched, misleading things to attract investment and promote entrepreneurship. Secondly, the infrastructure, as this one had outlined, CNI had been working very actively for the last 10 years to work with the government on why we need to invest more on infrastructure. It is not only making airports or roadways. It also means that you need to have right type of investment in hydropower, in transmission line, improving quality of the electricity, quality of water supplies, quality of living of the people, improving academics that will produce people who are ready to go to the market and work immediately. Then the employability of people will be better. And finally, the important issue that CNI have been working with the government is we need to also change our political systems understanding. They are happy to have more number of agreements with foreign governments to give more employment to people. They do not have a right attitude, right time, right policy to work back in the country and create more jobs. Our ministers are very, very happy to go to many markets, I don't want to take the names, and they will sign an agreement where they say, I will create job for 100,000 Nepalese people, and they will be very happy. I have seen in Nepal is the social pressure today for people to go abroad for a job. Our people, for example, I employ about 450 people in Nepal, and about 300 to 400 people from very skilled to unskilled people had migrated to many other markets for a job. Many of them do not have the similar job that we give to them. Not necessarily they get the more money. It is the psychological pressure. It is the parents' pressure. It is sometimes your spouse. He or she is making noise. Why you are working in DJPL? Go to Qatar, go to Malaysia. And when we send students to universities in US or in UK, they don't come back. We recommend them. Sometimes we pay them for going for higher studies, but they don't come back because the governments on all sides, they are happy to give work permits or PR or citizenship to those people because you also need good people. That is the challenge this country is facing, and it is quite natural. Unless we don't make our economy sustainable, unless we do not make this country attractive to young people, there is no complaint to be done. So it is the collective effort that needs from the private sector, from the government agencies, from the social and entrepreneurial side. We all need to come together and work together. And I thank our development partners. What you have said, Spencer, is really exciting for me as an entrepreneur. We'd like to see how we can work together on improving skill sets, especially giving right type of skill. For example, I'll give you a very interesting example. We are training people to only work on machine and computer interface, the human and machine interface system, we call it PLC. There are very few institutes where you can train them. Even in India, there are limited numbers of training available. We train them, the day we complete the training, this particular person will be given a job in Melbourne, Australia, or in San Francisco, or maybe in Ohio, or maybe in downtown Boston, because this whole global marketplace is open for everybody. So that is where we're facing challenge. We would like to do things so that we produce more number of people, so that even if we bleed them, we go on running our business. This is the solution. I realize this is what we're doing. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having your patience to listen, our experts, our panelists, and also I thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity to chair this session. I thank you all.